Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be diving into yet another Aeldari Codex tier list, this time looking at the changes from the June balance data slate. So I wanted to give this a little bit of time to kind of settle and simmer a little bit because, we didn't really know how the changes were going to affect where units belonged in this list. So I wanted to give it some time, I wanted to give it some games, see how the meta was kind of evolving and adapting to the new changes. So first off, I just want to mention that this video, like all tier lists, is going to be subjective, but there's going to be a lot of these choices that are honestly something that a large majority of the community can agree with. And although we might have some slight differences here and there in which units we believe are in what tier, I'm going to go ahead and explain the tier ranking in the way that I'm going to rank the units so that you have a better idea of where I'm coming from. So in our top tier, our S tier, these are going to be the almost auto-include units in the Aeldari Codex. The units that pretty much every competitive Eldar build is going to have at least one of if they want to be successful. And these are going to be typically units with abilities and, synergies that are pretty much vital to the playstyle of the Eldar and vital for the survival in the competitive meta we evolve in. We have some really serious competition for this S tier, and yeah, I think a lot of the new codexes that are coming out, being so powerful, so overtuned, are going to heavily determine what units are going to be in the top tiers. In A tier, we have our strong units, and these are going to be the units that are, not in every Eldar list, but they're in most Eldar lists, and they're widely considered to be excellent at their role. We have B tier, which is detachment specific or, synergy specific. And basically what these units are going to do is they're going to offer some unique synergies in certain detachments. They're going to have a little bit more power in certain detachments than, other units might have in that detachment, which is going to put them at B tier, but they might be pretty much garbage in other tiers. So we'll get to that tier more specifically when I put my first unit in that category. Then we have C tier. These are units that are just very weak for their points. Either they don't offer a lot of utility for the army, they don't offer a unique role, or they're just, in need of buffs in general. Maybe they work in one or two detachments, but they're not considered the best or most standout unit in that specific detachment. And then we have D tier, which is just basically needs a redesign. The unit is pretty much worthless, it's not very good, and it needs a serious look at. So units that are either way too expensive or units that just don't functionally work in the role that they're trying to portray are going to be units that are going to be in D tier. Okay, without further ado, let me go ahead and dive into this. And I'm going to try to get all the units. I'm pretty sure I have all the units in the Aeldari Codex here, including the Drukhari or quote-unquote Ynnari units, and we're going to review those as well in the context of their detachment. So, let me know in the comments if I miss anything, but I'm pretty sure I got them all here. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and rank our first unit, which is going to be Corsair Voidweavers. These are the battle line variant of the Corsairs. Now, they're 60 points per 5. They can take power weapons or shuriken rifles, although the shuriken rifles are pretty horrendous. I think everybody can agree with that. And they can also take a few other small upgrades in units of 5. When you bump them up to a unit of 10, they can take either a shuriken cannon or wraith cannon. Typically, though, you don't want them in a unit of 10 because they're just a good scoring unit. And that's basically what they're good at. They're good at scoring points. They're good at scouting up the battlefield early to, get some objectives or be able to put some presence on the battlefield. They're a good screen in case you need a deep screen for units that are close to your deployment zone, turns 1 and 2. And they also do some decent damage in combat. Power weapons with reroll hits against enemies on objectives isn't bad for a 60-point unit. They're able to trade against things that are going to be walking onto objectives or infiltrating onto objectives turn 1. I really like the scout matchup against these guys. So these guys charging into scouts on an objective, and of course I'm talking about Space Marine scouts specifically, they do some pretty good damage against them for the low cost of 60 points. You can also, of course, give them a special weapon per 5, so either a blaster or a shredder. I prefer the blaster just because it basically instant kills something if you can hit wound. The shredder is variable, right? It's D6, it's not that reliable, doesn't have any AP value, and so forth. But, you know, to each their own. I think both of the weapons are good in their own situations. But the fact that they all come with power weapons and inbuilt rerolls, plus the new ability to give them battle focus, which they can now use freely, makes them a very solid unit. I do think these guys can actually work in pretty much every detachment that exists. However, they do have some competition with another unit, specifically Rangers, right? Rangers are a little bit cheaper than these guys, and they do a very similar thing, except that Rangers don't do any damage. So instead, what Rangers bring is extra utility. However, I think the comparison is close enough to where if Rangers belonged to a certain tier, I think that Corsair Voidweavers would also belong to that tier. Now, there is a little bit more utility in having Infiltrate than Scout, so I'm going to put these guys, weirdly enough, in A tier. I think these guys are a good unit for 60 points. I think they deal enough damage to be an actual threat on the battlefield. And they have some good mobility with that Scout 7. They can move up Scout 7. Of course, they can then move 9 inches because of battle focus, right? Base 7 movement plus 2 inches. And they have grenades, which is also a great thing to have in a small unit like this. And it's something Rangers don't have. So Corsairs do offer things that Rangers don't typically have. Mostly, Rangers are a tiny bit cheaper, and therefore that's why people mostly go for them. And Infiltrate is a very powerful ability, but Scout is also really good as well. So we're going to put them in A tier. They are a strong unit at 60 points. Alrighty, let's go to the next unit, which is going to be the single Warlock. Of course, I'm talking about just the character Warlock here, not the Conclave. And the single character Warlock is very detachment specific. So it's not very good on its own, right? In any other detachment, aside from Seer Council, it's not that good. And just the reasons for this are pretty simple. They're very fragile. They're expensive for how fragile they are. They're not very mobile, so they can't just, be an action junkie for you. And also, their ability is pretty weak on most other detachments. Most other detachments don't really care if their Storm Guardians get charged out of Deep Strike. If I'm playing Aspect Host, if I'm playing, War Host, and you're charging my Storm Guardians with something, I'm okay with it. I'm generally okay with it, because that means that, basically you're going to be chewing through a bunch of Guardians while the rest of my damage dealers are going to be unharmed. In Seer Council, that changes because your Guardian bricks are actually very important. They're your main damage dealers. So you have a bunch of Warlocks typically in the form of Conclaves in those units, and adding a Warlock, a single Warlock with, Lucid Eye or Torque of Moray Hague or something like that can be very effective. And, the -2 to charges is just kind of icing on top, right? To prevent those deep strikes. It's especially important now that we're having a lot of 6-inch deep strikes in the game. So I think that in Seer Council specifically, having 1 or 2 of these in your army isn't a bad thing. I don't think they're the best unit in the army, but they're definitely a good support unit that can kind of hide in a Guardian blob. By the way, they can also hide in a Guardian blob that also has a Conclave of 4, an Eldrad or a Farseer. So it is legal to do that. A lot of people might argue that, but because of the changes to the FAQ when the Codex came out, we can definitely attach a Warlock to that unit, and we can attach a Warlock Conclave to the unit as well. So you can essentially have 5 Warlocks in a unit if you wanted to, which both makes it a huge damage dealing unit and also a very big point sink. So having a Warlock to make sure you don't get just obliterated by, Death Shroud Terminators or something like that coming from Deep Strike and charging in is a good idea. Okay, so that's the Warlock on foot. Pretty effective, I think, in Seer Council. in other detachments, you're just never going to use it because you're not really going to be using huge Warlock enclaves and, expensive Guardian squads. Okay, our next unit is going to be the Corsair Voidscarred. And I'm going to say the Voidscarred are going to be in C tier. Now, here's the reason for this. It's not because they're a bad unit. I don't think they're terrible, right? It's just that to fully appreciate all the upgrades that they can possibly get and all the different, character selections and stuff they can get, you have to buy a unit of 10, which is 160 points, which is a very big investment for a unit that can just die in one round of shooting, right? They're very fragile. They do have some kind of tricky durability things that they can do, like they can negate 1 damage point. But if anybody's firing, high rate of fire or, just volume of attacks will absolutely wreck these guys, and they don't do a ton of damage for that 160 point, price tag. So I think the biggest problem with these guys is they're actually a mixed arms unit. If you look at the loadouts, some of them have ranged weapons, some of them have melee weapons. You're going to have 2 blasters and probably a shuriken or wraith cannon in there. For the unit of 10, you're going to have the Wayseeker, who's going to have the, I can't remember, I think it's called Executioner, is the psychic shooting attack he has, which is really good, by the way. It's a precision attack. And you can also take a sniper rifle in the unit, so there's not a great chance you kill a character with that, but there's a decent chance you can kill something small. Then you have the power weapons, which all of these guys come with an extra attack over the Void Reavers, so they have 3 attacks apiece with the power weapon instead of 2 attacks, but they are losing the rerolls against enemies on objectives, and basically what they get instead of that is they get to pick a unit in the opponent's army, and against that unit, they're getting precision, and they're getting lethal hits. So against that specific unit, they're a really good assassin-style unit. They can take out a character pretty easily between all of their melee and range attacks. The main issue lies with getting them into combat, which of course is going to also take more resources, right? Either a Wave Serpent, or if you're running Seer Council, you can teleport them across the battlefield because they are a Psyker unit thanks to the Wayseeker. And I think that they have some play in Seer Council. I just don't know if they're actually strong enough to get the job done against a lot of the bigger characters in the game, right? Things like Marneus Calgar. He's just too tough, right? For this unit to assassinate him out of the unit. The Feel No Pain makes him really strong. And, just being able to just shrug off wounds like that is going to make him almost impossible to kill. Against lighter characters, I would say that sometimes it's not really worth it. You can do it with other units far cheaper. Like, for example, charging a unit of Howling Banshees into a squad and then just, having an Autarch in your unit. Spending a CP and using Epic Challenge is a much easier way to get an assassination off against an important character. So, yeah, I think the unit's decent. I don't think it's a bad unit. I just think it does need some buffs. I would actually like to see this unit be changed so that you could take some of the more expensive or quote-unquote valuable options that you can take in the 10-man in the 5-man. So, for example, if you could take, instead of 4 special, characters or, 4 special models in the unit, you could take up to 2 special models in the 5-man instead of what's currently 0. Right now, you can take 0 special models. You can only take a blaster, a special weapon. But if you could take, like, the Wayseeker, for example, and the, Channeler, I think that would be pretty cool. I think that would actually be a pretty awesome unit. I would take that unit for 80 points if I could take a couple of these special characters that are attached to the unit that you normally would get in the kill team. Or the Shade Runner, right? If I could take the Shade Runner and the Wayseeker, that would also be pretty awesome. That would make the unit a very effective little 80-point package. But yeah, unfortunately you can't. So I think that's where the unit really struggles, is that you do need to make the investment, and once you make the investment, it's you're going to have to get the unit's points value back, or, just game value back somehow. And it's not that good at scoring objectives, right? It's a big unit. It's too expensive to be expendable to score secondaries and things like that. I mean, you could score a secondary with it, but it's not its main role. And that's why I'm putting it in C tier. I don't even think it maybe needs a points buff. I just think it needs to be able to take the options in the 5-man unit so that it's a little bit more balanced. And of course, you could take the 10-man unit if you wanted more damage. But as we know, for the most part, aside from, a couple of factions out there, which, we all know which ones I'm talking about, most factions want to take squads like this in the minimum size. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next data sheet, which is the Farseer on foot. So the Farseer on foot, pretty good, honestly. I like it in a number of detachments. However, I do think that it benefits some detachments more than others. And even though it's useful in every detachment, you don't typically want him in every detachment just because of the fact that he is 70 points, right? He's almost the same amount of points as an Aspect Warrior. So if you're running Aspect Host or War Host, you're probably better off saving the points for another squad of Aspect Warriors than you are someone who can buff, the squad that he's with and throw Guide out there. Having said that, I do think Guide is very good. Having +1 to hit against a target is insane. It's helped me in numerous games when I'm running my Seer Council, and that's really where I think he belongs. I think he belongs in a Seer Council list because he's giving +1 to hit, which buffs a lot of the things that Seer Council likes to take. Warwalkers, Wraithlords, really likes to buff things like, Dark Reapers, for example. Dark Reapers love this detachment, and Dark Reapers love a Farseer, right? +1 to hit, and you can't be, affected by things like stealth or -1 to hit abilities with Dark Reapers, so that works really well together. His actual ability is pretty good with Guardian Defenders, and again, the only two detachments you're going to be taking Guardian Defenders in are going to be Guardian Battle Host and Seer Council. And I do think he's also pretty good in Guardian Battle Host because of his just ability to, make Guardians stronger. But that's basically it. He's not as good as the old Farseer. His, Strands of Fate ability is not as good. It's decent, but usually what I find is I'm basically using it on the hit or wound roll of the Bright Lance in the unit, and I'm not always using it for the damage roll because it just never gets to that point. I've used it on the damage roll exactly one time in the 20 plus games I've played with Seer Council. Mostly it's either on to hit or to wound. I don't know why, but that Bright Lance in my army just loves to fail the hit or wound roll for whatever reason. But yeah, it just never gets through to damage, unfortunately, and that's kind of, affecting my thoughts on the ability itself. I do think it's a good ability. I just think that when are you going to take Guardian Defenders except in, Seer Council or Guardian Battle Host? And that's why it's in B tier. It is a good model, but it is detachment specific. All right, let's talk about the next Farseer, and that's going to be the Farseer Skyrunner. The Farseer Skyrunner, guys, yikes. C tier. Needs some serious buffs. One of the main reasons it needs buffs is because its ability is awful, right? So if you take a look at the context of the Farseer Skyrunner and what he's typically going to be running with, he's going to be running with Wind Riders, which makes his, Strands of Fate ability not that great, right? Wind Riders do have Shuriken Cannon, so he can proc an automatic lethal hit with one Shuriken Cannon in the squad, which is okay, but it's not great. It's definitely not as good as doing it with a Bright Lance. And his ability, Misfortune, is a huge swing and a miss, right? Because it doesn't actually add that much durability to your unit. So basically, if you don't know what it does, you mark a target. It's like Guide, except you mark a target and that unit is at -1 to wound. So basically, if it shoots you the next turn, all of its rolls are at -1 to wound, which seems really good, except the fact that in most cases, if something is out in the open within line of sight, you're going to want to kill it if it can deal a lot of damage, right? Let me give you a good example, right? If you're going to battle against Thousand Suns and they have a Mutalith Vortex Beast out in the, on a center objective, and you need to kill it, Misfortune has 0 playability, because if you don't kill that Mutalith, it's still going to kill most of your stuff, right? This is not a tough army. And I think that's the main reason why this guy's not so good. This would be a great ability in a Space Marine army, right? If I was running Space Marines and this was like a librarian type of thing, like a librarian on a bike, that would be a great ability. Shit. Being able to throw -1 to wound on something that I know I'm not going to be able to attack because I'm a slow, stupid Monkai, that would be awesome. Because now next turn, your big bad is going to be at -1 to wound. And all of my stuff is really tough, right? Space Marine stuff is usually pretty durable. However, that's not the case. We are Aeldari, we are the superior species, but we're also really fragile, right? We spend all of our time thinking, we have big brains, but we don't exactly, pump our bodies full of steroids and other hormones. So, what can I say? The ability just doesn't do exactly what it's supposed to do. So that's why it's in need of serious buffs. It's also more expensive than the Farseer on foot for some reason. And although he does decent damage, he doesn't do more damage than a squad of Wind Riders. So even in Wind Rider Host, where you would think the Farseer would be really good, he ends up actually being kind of a liability, because at the same points cost as a unit of Wind Riders, why not just take more Wind Riders, right? Wind Riders are objectively better than a Farseer Skyrunner at dealing damage. Even with the buffs, by the way. Even with the rerolls to hit, even with all that stuff, right? Like all the stratagem support, the Wind Riders end up just doing more against a wider variety of targets. So yeah, truthfully, I think the only reason why you'd ever take a Farseer Skyrunner is in one single detachment, Wind Rider Host, and only if you take the Seer Sight Strike on him to give him that anti-vehicle, anti-monster ability, which, by the way, it is very good. The Seer Sight Strike Farseer in Wind Rider Host does a good amount of damage to vehicles and monsters, and that's probably the only, honestly, one that's worth it. Or the other one can give you Scout. So you don't necessarily take him for the damage itself. You just take him because he can give a Wind Rider unit Scout. However, having played Wind Rider Host several times, I'm not sure the Scout ability is actually worth it on a unit that has already a very long range and has a lot of threat. So, yeah. So, C tier, definitely for the Farseer Skyrunner. On the other hand, the Warlock Skyrunner is probably one of the best single models in the entire book. And it didn't get nerfed, guys. We can still run it at 45 points. And it's not even a character, so it doesn't even give up Assassination. This is an S tier unit. And I know some people will argue about that and say, oh, well, no, it's only good in certain detachments. I honestly believe that it is one of the best single models, not only in our codex, but in the entire game for its points. It's 45 points. It has access to a pretty strong Flamer attack, which can be boosted by nearby Warlocks or other Psychers. So it can get up to Strength 7, D6 plus 2 attacks at AP -1. It ignores cover. So even when it's not in a unit, by the way, it ignores cover. By the way, if you guys don't know this, they changed the rule on the Warlock Skyrunner in the FAQ and the errata so that it does actually ignore cover. So if you guys don't believe me on that, check that out in the, on the Warhammer community website. Has a Shuriken Catapult, has a, Singing Spear, moves very fast, is more durable than the Warlock on foot, so it's way better at actually surviving attacks. It won't survive out in the open, obviously. It'll be easy to kill, but it can survive a little bit better against light and direct fire. I've had this thing survive against a Basilisk, right? Basilisk shooting directly at it, got 2 wounds on it. He failed one of them. He only took 2 wounds. He survived because he was a little bit more durable than the Warlock on foot. The Warlock on foot would have died. The other great thing about this guy, I mentioned before, not a character, doesn't give up Assassinate, but you can take up to 3 of them in your army, and not only can they join Wind Riders, but they can also just fly around solo, score you objectives, move block, which weirdly enough, they're kind of good at doing because they're super fast and annoying. So really good at move blocking the flanks, right? Like certain flanks can actually fit things like Rhinos and Leman Russ battle tanks can just kind of fit through it. And these guys just block that, right? They just totally block that from being able to happen. So yeah, they can be very effective at that. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about them. They're super cheap. They score you great objectives. They can move block, screen. They can provide a unit of Wind Riders, ignores cover, which is a great ability. They ignore cover themselves. And they're just a really great tech piece that also does some decent damage. So yeah, S tier unit. I think that pretty much every army, if it had 45 points left over and didn't have an enhancement to buy, that's, key to the list, I think you add one of these into your army. I think it's a no-brainer. Absolutely good. Excellent. Okay, next unit is going to be the Wayleaper, the Autarch Wayleaper. I think the Autarch Wayleaper, guys, I know this is unpopular. I know people run it, but I think it's a C tier unit, and I'm going to kind of explain why to you guys in just a second. So here's the thing. The Autarch Wayleaper itself, if you look at its datasheet, is pretty good, but you have to think of it in context. So the Autarch Wayleaper does a couple of things. One, it gives the unit that it's with a free stratagem that it can use, which is powerful, right? That's always going to be a good ability. Two, and this is the weaker ability, if you use a battle focus token on a unit, then on a 3+, you get to get that battle focus token back. So you basically get to recoup it. It's kind of like the Chronos ability with pain tokens. Now, that's not a great ability. However, it is a Wayleaper, it does have fly, it has great melee stats, right? The Starglaive is really good, you can give it a fusion gun. On paper, this thing looks like it would be pretty good. However, you can only join it to units of Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders, or you can run it solo. If you run it with Swooping Hawks, it makes the Swooping Hawks extremely expensive. It makes them 165 points. And he doesn't really contribute to their damage, right? So their damage is going to be usually done at 24 inches. If you're running a squad of 5, you're going to be running them in 2 ways. You're going to be running them as an objective style unit, a screening unit, or a move blocking unit, right? They're going to do a little bit of damage here and there. They can deal a lot of damage to light infantry, but against heavy infantry, they're really going to struggle. They're not going to do much damage. So against armies like Space Marines, the best way to use these guys, Swooping Hawks, is to use them to move block. In most cases, adding an 80-point character to a unit whose goal is to die so that your other units can get better line of sight on that target is not a good idea. It's kind of like if it was possible to add a character to Poxwalkers, right? It's why you see, basically this, right? Think about Death Guard. Death Guard are really OP army right now. They have this unit, Poxwalkers, right? Which are a, infiltrating, move blocking unit. They're fodder, right? You don't take them in your army to do damage. You take them in the army to score objectives, to move block your opponent, and to frustrate them. That's what Swooping Hawks do as well, except they're a little bit better on the damage front. And, of course, faster and a lot of other things. But anyway, my point is you're not going to add an expensive character to a Poxwalker unit because that defeats the purpose of having a cheap screening unit, right? So that's why I don't think it works really well in a Swooping Hawk squad, at least the way I use Swooping Hawks. Some people use them for damage. Personally, I think if you're using them for damage in high point games, you're going to be disappointed a lot of the times, and they're very easy to kill. I would be very happy if my opponent sat back and shot with a unit of Swooping Hawks, killed 4 dudes, right? Or not even that. Like I'm thinking 4 Guardians, but if I'm running a Space Marine army and you kill 2 of my Space Marine intercessors or 2 of my Jump Pack intercessors or whatever, and then I'm able to wipe that squad of Swooping Hawks, I'm a happy Space Marine player, right? I'm a happy Smurf. I'm Papa Smurf. So I don't think adding a Autarch to the unit does a lot in that case. Now, Warp Spiders make an interesting case for the Wayleaper in a couple of different builds. One of the builds is with the Power Blade array. So being able to use the free stratagem on this, squad, maybe a free command reroll or something like that, to give you a little bit of a boost in the Autarch's damage. Being able to move 14 inches and then charge something with a pretty powerful melee package is enticing. However, Warp Spiders, despite their Exarch being an absolute king at melee damage, are not good in melee. So even though the Exarch does a lot of work for the squad, it's not really worth putting an Autarch in there because there are better melee options at your disposal. We have access to one of the best melee units in the entire game, Howling Banshees. Howling Banshees are the same cost as Warp Spiders, and even though the Autarch on foot is now 5 points more expensive, he is arguably way better with them because he allows them to reroll the advance roll. So when choosing between putting an Autarch in a unit of Warp Spiders or putting it in a unit of Banshees, maybe if you don't have the extra 5 points, but I would also argue that it's probably not even worth that, I would just rather have a melee unit, right? I would rather just have a unit of Howling Banshees in my army than being able to boost a squad of Warp Spiders' melee potential. The other thing about Warp Spiders, guys, is they're not really a damage-dealing unit. They do deal a lot of damage to light targets. They can also kill 3 to 4 Space Marines, depending on how you roll. If you roll low, you're probably going to kill about 2 or 3. If you roll high, I've seen Warp Spiders kill 4 or 5, honestly. On lucky, again, you're going to have to get a little lucky here. I'm not talking about averages. Probably going to kill about 3 on average, 4 if you're, just roll a little bit above average, and then, 5 if you have a god roll, right? So they can deal some significant damage, but that's not really their main role. Just like Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders are really good at scoring objectives and screening and move blocking, right? They are one of the fastest units in the game. Actually, I do think they are the fastest unit in the game, just base, 24 inches, 26 with a battle focus token. They can get to places that other units can't dream of getting in turn 1. And that means they have a lot of scoring potential and also the potential to frustrate your opponent's plans. I've had a single squad of Warp Spiders stop 3 vehicles from being able to get line of sight on my Wraithlords turn 1. They made up their points without having to shoot a single time. Now, of course, they did shoot a little bit, but they didn't really do any real damage, right? The main reason why you take those 2 units, Warp Spiders and Swooping Hawks, is to give you a battlefield advantage, right? It's not because of their damage. Yes, they can deal damage, and optimally, right, you should be using them to both move block, screen, and do damage all at the same time. It's not always possible to do all 3, but you want to be able to do at least 2 of those on any given turn. Or score an objective, right? That's the 4th thing. And the Autarch Wayleaper really doesn't fit into that role, because the Autarch Wayleapers doesn't make the squad better at scoring objectives. It makes the squad better at dealing damage. And that's fundamentally why I don't think the Autarch Wayleaper is that good. Now, I've seen people play it with success, and, honestly, I'll eat crow if this thing becomes really competitive and you see it on a lot of competitive lists all of a sudden. But I have to say, it feels to me like it's more of a flavor choice for a lot of the players taking. And a lot of players that tell me they run the Wayleaper, it's because they love the melee damage of, having something that can deal some significant melee in a squad that normally doesn't do melee, right? Subverting expectations. Making the enemy think you're going to do one thing with the unit and then do something completely different, right? Eldar mind tricks. I think that's kind of why people use this guy, is because he totally changes what the squad wants to do. And if somebody's not going to pick up on that, then they're going to be losers in that situation. They might fall for a big trap, a big Aeldari trap. I don't think a really experienced player falls for that, though, because the moment you put a Wayleaper in the unit, the squad's value is inherently increased, and you're going to realize they're not going to just throw away that unit, right? They're going to try to use it for melee or range combat. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the on the Wayleaper. I think he's good on paper. I just, in context of the units that he can join, I don't think he's that good. Okay, let's talk about Eldrad. Eldrad Uthran, my boy. You got to put him in S tier. He's S tier, guys. He didn't get nerfed, right? He didn't get hit with that rumored CP nerf, right? In the June balance Dataslate. That never happened. Either it was a totally fake rumor or it was real at one point, but then the GW team decided, you know what? We love Space Marines too much. We don't want to hurt Marnius's feelings any more than we already have. And we need to kind of jerk him off a little bit. So we're going to leave that in the game. I don't think Eldrad was even thought about. I don't even think he even crossed the minds of GW people. But yeah, being able to farm CP, really fucking good. A-okay. Doom is one of the best damage multipliers in the game, right? Being able to give a +1 to wound to anything is going to make them significantly better at taking out tough targets. And God, do we have a meta just filled, disgustingly filled with tough targets like Death Guard, Thousand Suns. Oh, we're going to have Chaos Knights coming up soon. Oh, right? We have just a ton of toughness skew right now in the meta. And Eldrad takes care of that for you. He takes care of you. He wipes your booty with that. So, yeah, absolutely great model. Being able to, doom something. Mind War is not really a thing, by the way. It never works for me. I always roll a 1. Every time I go against Eldrad, every time he uses Mind War, rolls a 1. I don't know what it is, guys, but he just loves rolling 1s on Mind War. It's like a sick joke. So, Doom is awesome. Being able to farm CP, critical for many detachments, especially Seer Council, but other detachments as well. Like, I think he's close to being an auto-include in most armies. Okay, next up is the Spiritseer. Now, the Spiritseer, I'm going to put in C tier, honestly, for different reasons in the Autarch Wayleaper. I think the Spiritseer is garbage, guys. And the reason I think it's garbage is because if you think about it in relation to the units that want to be buffed by him, he has a number of challenges. One, he's only a lone op if he's within 3 inches of Wraith units, which makes it extremely hard for him to keep up with things like Wraithlords, especially if they want to charge into combat. Same thing with Wraithblades. Wraith Guard are a little bit different because they're a shooting unit, but the problem with Wraith Guard in this Spiritseer is that if you use the more competitive Wraith Guard option, which has the D-sights, you lose the ability to get sustained hits, which is his ability. So because D-sights are torrent weapons, you don't roll, so you never get sustained hits with them. So that kind of sucks. His other ability, Reviving Wraithguard, again, only works, I believe, within 6 inches. So unfortunately, if the squad takes damage, you're going to have to be within 6 inches at that point to be able to resurrect a model. Furthermore, he's pretty expensive. He's almost as expensive as a Farseer. He is 65 points. He's not cheap. If this guy was 50 points, I would say that he's better. I'd probably put him in B tier and say, hey, this guy's a cheap psyker that can work for a lot of your Wraith units in this specific detachment, Spirit Conclave, right? Which is where he belongs. Unfortunately, he's just not that good, right? His abilities don't really work well to buff Wraithguard and Wraith units. They don't. He doesn't give them an extra +1 to hit or anything like that on top of what a regular psyker already does. His sustained hits ability only works for a specific few models. Doesn't work on the Wraith Knight, by the way, which sucks. On Wraithlords, it can be okay, but again, on Wraithlords, it's kind of like, I'm probably not going to be within 3 inches by the end of the turn, and it requires line of sight to the target. So the Spiritseer and the Wraithlord both need to see the target in order to get sustained hits. It's not like a buff you can just put on a Wraithlord, right? Because then it would be pretty good. I would actually say that it would be decent. But you can't. You need line of sight, which means this guy just gets popped next turn, right? So unless you're running him in specifically Spirit Conclave, where your entire army is made up of Wraiths, he's not really that safe. Now, in Spirit Conclave, you probably do have to have one of these because you need the, light of, I think it's called Light of Clarity, which gives extra OC to your Wraith units. That is really useful for controlling primary. but it has a limited range. Again, it suffers from this range issue, which means that you can't put this guy in a safe position. He really does need to be right next to Wraith units, and because he can't join the unit, he's often a very easy target. Like, Lone Op 12, when you're in the middle of the battlefield, actually doesn't mean shit, right? It really doesn't, because an opponent can just walk up to you, shoot an overcharged plasma pistol at you, a couple of plasma pistols, bolt pistols, and he's dead, right? I've had this guy be killed by a single unit of assault intercessors, not even charging, by the way, because he wasn't able to be charged, but by shooting him. They shot him to death with bolt pistols and a plasma pistol. Let that sink in for a second. He's extremely fragile. He's only 3 wounds. It's not like a Farseer, which is a 4-wound character, right? And also Farseers can join units, so kind of makes it a lot more durable. Spiritseer can't. So yeah, I think the Spiritseer needs some serious buffs. I would even go so far as to say a points buff isn't going to help him in any other detachment besides Spirit Conclave, but he does need a points decrease. Probably a rules rewrite at some point as well. Like, I think his ability should have more range. I think his Lone Op ability should have at least a 6-inch range instead of a 3-inch range. So if he's within 6 inches of a Wraith unit, he gets Lone Op. I think also that his ability to, Light of Clarity should be 12 inches. It's currently, I think, 9 inches. So yeah, those abilities need to increase in range, definitely. And I think if they do increase in range, then the Spiritseer becomes a much more viable pick, and I would put him in B tier instead. But as of now, he just has too many issues. All right, let's look at Yvraine. Yvraine is Ynnari only, so that's the only detachment we're going to be thinking of her in, and you got to take her in the army. She's an auto-include, but she's not a great auto-include, right? She's kind of like, she's a little bit of a tax. She's good, but she's not that good. She's not as good as she once was. Her best ability is being able to deal mortal wounds. She's really good at that. But otherwise, with the nerfs to Incubi, with the nerfs to, Yvraine's ability, she used to be able to reroll all wounds with her unit. Now it's only reroll wounds of 1, which kind of sucks. She's just not that good, right? So Yvraine, honestly, I'm going to put her in B tier because she's just, even within her own detachment, she's not that good. Like, if she wasn't required, I could see people not taking her at all. In my honest opinion, if it was me, I wouldn't take her at all in Ynnari. For 100 points, I think there are better things you can take. So that's my personal opinion. Having said that, what is she good at? Well, she's really good at killing 1 wound infantry that has a good save, so she's really good at killing other Eldar models with her shooting attack. She can deal some decent damage to Space Marines if she's able to, get a good roll on the D6 plus 3. If she can get like a 5 or a 6, she can kill quite a few Space Marines as well. And that's basically it. She's decent in combat, but she's not great in combat. She's not the Visarch in combat. So that's who we're going to talk about next, the Visarch. And I wish you could take the Visarch as like an auto. Like, basically, I wish you could take any of the Triumvirate for your Warlord in Ynnari, but unfortunately you can't. So where does the Visarch fit in? The Visarch is good. I think he's a strong unit. And here's why. Let me give you my explanation. I think that he's good simply because he gives his unit fights first, and because he has very strong melee presence himself. He's a good model. The issue with the Visarch, I think, is that the units he can take are now pretty nerfed, right? Like, you could put him in Corsairs. I think arguably Corsair Voidweavers may be the best way to use them. Maybe it's still Incubi, right? Like, maybe you take a unit of 5 Incubi with the Visarch, and that's your kind of melee fights first unit. Now, the problem with this, I think, is that for about the same amount of points, you can take a Howling Banshee unit with an Autarch on foot. And the Autarch on foot gives you a lot more utility. An Autarch on foot gives you more damage into 3 wound models. An Autarch on foot gives you the ability to take grenades. So on a unit that normally doesn't have it, like Banshees. Banshees also have anti-infantry. So The thing is Incubi are going to struggle into anything that's T5 or above. They're going to really struggle. Even into T4, because of the changes that happen to your brain, you're not really getting a lot of damage out of them anymore. So, arguably, Banshees are just better, right? I think we can all agree with that, right? Like, Banshees are better than Incubi in Ynnari. And that kind of leaves the Visarch in a bad spot. So, A tier, yes, he's strong. Giving fights first to Incubi is really good. I still think the huge Yvrain brick thing could be a thing. It's just a lot weaker than it was, but people can still run it. I don't think it's optimal anymore. But unfortunately, I don't like him that much. He is a little bit more durable, though, than the Autarch. So, +1 wound, +1 save. He has a 2-up save, which is pretty good. He's really good into epic heroes. So, there's a good chance that he charges into Guilliman and kills him in combat, in single combat. That's about it. That's kind of what I see this guy as. I see him as a model that's really strong on his own, but his options on who he can join is rather limited. And yeah, that's basically it. But fights first, guys, fights first is always good. Like, this guy could join a unit of Corsair Voidweavers, and that could be useful because fights first is strong, right? Having a unit with fights first, especially if he himself is getting fights first, can be very good. So I guess I'll put him in A tier, but he's not a strong A tier. I would probably put him in either high B tier or low A tier. That's my synopsis on this guy. All right, let's talk about the Death Jester. So the Death Jester is perhaps one of the saddest stories in 40k. He's really not great in any detachment except Harlequins, and even then, he's not even that good. Like, he's good if a unit is below half strength because of the Murder's Jest. I think it's called Murder's Jest enhancement, which allows him to auto crit against units that are below half strength. Other than that, he's just not that good. I'd actually put him in C tier. I'd put him with these guys. The reason being is because detachment-specific units are typically good in their detachment, right? And C tier units are units that, even in the best detachment that they could go in, they're not the best unit in the army, or they're not that good, right? The Death Jester kind of falls into that. I know some people will still take the Death Jester, but he's 110 points, right? So I think the thing is that when you're running Harlequins, you really need to use other units to kind of fill in the Harlequins' main weaknesses, and the Death Jester really doesn't do that for your army. You already have a ton of characters. You have a Solitaire. Usually you're going to have 3 Troop Masters, right? Those are the characters that are going to be doing the most damage. They're the guys that are going to be on the front line, scoring you the points, killing the enemy units, doing all that kind of stuff. Those are the characters you're going to spend CP on to revive. The Death Jester's just kind of sitting there laughing away, kind of nonchalant about everything, and just kind of shooting whatever he can. And he may pop off, right? Like, I've had this guy pop off, and I've run him in a Harlequin detachment. I've run him in Reaper's Wager quite a bit. When he pops off, he pops off. Like, he kills a lot. But it's really rare. Like, it's rare to roll 2 6s just base, right? Like, on 3 dice, 2 of them are 6s. Like, that's a rare thing. And yeah, that's kind of all I need to say about it. I've rolled 3 6s with this guy before. That doesn't mean that he's good, right? It just means that if I roll high with him, just like any other unit, it's going to do some serious damage. So yeah, I think he just needs some buffs. I think he needs to be cheaper. I think right now he's 90 points. I think he's a 70-point unit. 75 points maybe. I don't think he's 90 points. He was 90 points in the index because of the enhancement, Fate's Messenger. He's no longer 90 points worth of model. So, yeah. C tier. Okay, Solitaire. Solitaire's A tier. The reason why I don't have this dude in S tier is because he's really only good in Harlequins. I think you can use him in other armies because he can be, of course, affected by battle focus, which is really powerful on the Solitaire. But we have a really good fights first unit now, right? We have Howling Banshees. Howling Banshees are a super good fights first unit. They're not as fragile as the Solitaire. The Solitaire is pretty fragile when it gets hit by something like a grenade. And Banshees won't necessarily die to one grenade, right? This guy will. So he's also more expensive, right? He's 115 points. He is really good, though, I have to say. I think the other problem this guy has is the fact that even though he has precision and all that, the new meta really just isn't his friend, right? And Death Guard are all toughness 6 base, sometimes toughness 7. So against those targets, he's wounding on 7 or 5s, right? He's wounding on 5s because he's strength 6, or he's wounding on 4s. He's just not going to get a lot of damage through. To give you a quick example, if he runs into a death, basically a Death Guard squad, a Plague Marine squad, he's at -1 to hit, so he's hitting on 3s. He's wounding on 4s, so even on a blitz turn, he's only getting like 4 wounds in, and then they're getting 5-up saves. So he's only killing like 3 models, right? Typically, this guy, if he runs into a Space Marine squad, can kill almost all the Space Marines in the unit, right? He can almost kill all 10. Against Death Guard or Rubric Marines, I mean, Rubric Marines are a little easier to kill, but then you have to worry about the Flamers and using a bunch of battle focus tokens to make this guy immune to Overwatch, or just really play him very well. I think this guy really rewards really good play, but I only think he's good in Harlequins. He's fantastic. In the Harlequin detachment, he's auto-include each and every time. He's a wonderful model. You can revive him. He can benefit from the stratagems. He's amazing. In every other detachment, he has no strat support, so it's not like in the Index where he had access to things like Fire and Fade. He had access to things like, lightning fast reactions for -1 to hit. He had access to Fate dice, I think. I think he did, but yeah, he did, right? He definitely had access to Fate dice. So, yeah, I just think he's a lot weaker in other detachments than he is in Quins, but he is still good. He is still a fights first. I do think, though, he lost some power in the Index. And in the Index, I thought he was an S tier unit, but probably lower on the S tier ranking. I just really loved using him with all the different stratagems in the Index and stuff. But unfortunately, in the Codex, there's really only one detachment that he can benefit from a whole lot, and that's the Quinn detachment, right? Ghost of the Webway. So I did put him in A tier. I didn't put him in B tier. Reason I put him in A tier is because I still think he's good in other detachments. I just don't think he's that great in other detachments. I think there's better options. But, he's an absolute S tier in his own detachment, so I kind of put him in the middle. That's my reasoning. Okay, let's look at the Shadowseer. The Shadowseer, I think, is C tier as well. And I'm surprised at how wrong I was when I was talking about the Shadowseer in the Index. Some of you might remember this. I made a video on the worst units in the Eldar Index, and the Shadowseer was one of them. And I said the Shadowseer would be awesome if it just gave its unit lone op. And I was completely wrong. The Shadowseer is much better than it was. It was unusable in the Index. Horrible. It was one of the worst models in the game. Now it's just okay, but the reason why it's still a C tier unit is because Lone Op 18 isn't actually that good. Especially on units that typically want to be in transports, Lone Op 18 rarely does anything. If you're on foot, then it still doesn't do much because you're going to have to get into range of enemy units to engage them in melee, because that's Quinn's whole thing, is they're not a ranged unit, they're a combat unit. So Lone Op 18, not that good. The hazardous ability is interesting, but it doesn't go off enough to really be a value. So if you charge a minimum unit of Quins into a big Death Star of Terminators or a big Death Star of Plague Marines, it might be worth it, but keep in mind that it's contingent on your opponent rolling 1s. So if they attack back with 7 models, on average, they're only going to lose 1 model to that. It's not going to do a lot. This is really a good ability in prolonged combats. This is good against things that don't have a lot of melee potential. that are just stuck in combat with you. But at that point, they're probably going to die anyway, just to the Quins attacks. So you're not getting much value out of that ability. It's very funny when that ability goes off and you hit a character for 3 damage or something like that, right? It can be funny. It could definitely be useful. And in some cases, if your opponent rolls a lot of 1s, it could be great. But it's one of those abilities that on average doesn't do a lot, and you shouldn't rely on it. The Lone Op 18 is something you shouldn't rely on either, because it's only going to save you when you're not in the midfield. And even sometimes then, I mean, if you're caught out in the open, all the unit has to do is get within 18 inches, walk forward, and shoot you. So yeah, I don't think the Shadowseer is really that good. Plus, you're losing on the ability to, have extra damage with the Troop Master. The Troop Master really is just such a solid character for Harlequins that it's not really worth it to take the Shadowseer. Like, you're almost better off just taking another unit of Quins, basically, if you have the points. So, yeah, I just don't think it's that useful. I think to make it better, give the unit 12-inch Lone Op. I think that'd be great. I think that kind of settles a lot of the problems that it has in the midfield. Like, a 12-inch Lone Op and anti-infantry Harlequin unit with a Shadowseer attached is pretty solid. I think it'd be a decent include. It would be really good in its own detachment, but it wouldn't be so OP as to where you would see it in other lists outside of a few, here and there. So yeah, I think give it 12-inch Lone Op. It's not being used, GW, and it definitely needs a buff. So yeah. Okay, next up is the Ynnari Archon. I think the Ynnari Archon sucks. I think it needs buffs. I'm going to give you a couple reasons why. First of all, doesn't have access to Feel No Pain. Power from Pain. Not Feel No Pain. Doesn't have access to Power from Pain. So if it joins Incubi, yes, it can give them a free stratagem. Who cares? Incubi are more points now, and they just don't really need it, right? In every way, shape, and form, an Autarch with Banshees is going to be better than an Archon with Incubi. In every single case, guys. Literally. I don't think there's one case in which Incubi do better. Their ability is just straight up worse. Being able to force a Battle Shock test is only good in Drukhari, because Drukhari get pain tokens from failed Battle Shock. It's not really worth it in Ynnari. The other thing, of course, I mean, it's important for, like, stratagems, like, stuff like that, but, I mean, when does that actually happen, right? It's very rare. But anyway, the Archon giving them the free stratagem isn't really that good. He also gives them the ability, I believe, to get some rerolls. I think it's like rerolls 1s to hit, or reroll all hits if below half strength. I think that sucks. Because realistically, unless you're running the squad as a massive unit, the rerolls don't really help, right? And you already have a stratagem that gives you rerolls. So, yeah, it's just not a very good unit. I'm not a huge fan of the Archon, the Ynnari Archon. I don't think a lot of people take him either. It's kind of one of those units that he doesn't really seem like he has a place when you have things like Autarchs that you can put in units. So yeah, that's my main issue with the guy. He just doesn't do a lot for his points. And he's also expensive. 85 points is kind of a lot. Like, it's a lot of points to pay, right? So yeah, I'm just not that excited for him. Oh, you know what I just remembered? The ability itself, it's not rerolls to hit, it's rerolls to wound, which is okay, but they need to be below starting strength to be able to access that ability. So it's going to be something that is going to take a little bit of chance to be able to activate. So yeah, in most cases, I just think he needs some buffs. I would honestly go so far as to say that instead of the CP thing that he does now, gives a free CP, we already have models that do that. We have Autarchs. Give him the Lord of Deceit ability, right? Just word it so that it can only be used once per round, once per battle round, but give him the same thing the Dark Eldar guy has, just once per battle round, right? Once per battle round, one stratagem, cost an enemy within 12 inches, one additional CP. I think that'd be way better. And I think at that point, there would be a place for the Archon in the list. Okay, let's go on to the Ynnari Succubus. The Ynnari Succubus sucks, right? It's the same thing. It's the same exact thing as Ynnari Archon. It just doesn't really add a lot. Witches are also really bad in Ynnari. They don't get as many, bonuses. Pain tokens are really the only thing that gives witches hitting power, and also Sky Splinter Assault. The Ynnari detachment gives them nothing. They have strength 3, AP -1 weapons. Yeah, right. Right? There's a lot better units in the game, and I think Ynnari witches are like, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're 90 points, which is ridiculous, right? They're more expensive than Drukhari witches, and they're worse. So, yeah, just don't take them. Don't take those. Don't take the Succubus. They're both bad. They need buffs. I think point buffs would probably be enough. Like, if you could reduce Ynnari witches down to like 75 points and the Succubus gets dropped to like 35 points. I know that seems wild, but really the Succubus is not that good. It's really not. So yeah, I think, even 40 points I think would be fine, because it's just not that, it's really fragile. Witches are really fragile. The thing dies like to a stiff breeze. It doesn't do that much damage against anything that's except infantry, but even then that's a stretch. Yeah, make it a little cheaper, and you got a unit that's decent. Okay, let's talk about the Warwalker. The Warwalker is, I'm going to put it in A tier. Now, I know a lot of you might think, oh, no way, right? No way it's A tier. But it recently, hear me out, guys, recently got a points decrease. There's a lot of armies in the game right now. Their armor and toughness skewing. So there's a lot of durability in the game right now. Having AP -1 on an enemy target that you need to kill is really important. Our units are getting more expensive. We have less resources to be able to pour into killing enemy units. So a Warwalker kind of makes perfect sense in this meta. It's a long-range unit, so it's away from, the main fighting of the battle. It's something that your opponent can easily ignore, right? And basically, by the way, guys, I've played so many games with the Warwalker now, I can honestly say 4 out of 5 games, my Warwalker survives. Because no one wants to shoot it, because it doesn't do any damage. It really doesn't do any damage. So the number of games I've played where I've like shot the Bright Lances and then my opponent's like, oh, what else does it have? I'm like, it just has 2 Bright Lances. They're like, oh, okay. And they don't care about it. So all game, it's just reducing armor off of any unit that I want to kill. And it's a good buff, but your opponent is never going to pour the resources to kill it. Because to kill this thing, they need to get in your backfield. And if you have it screened properly, your opponent really can't get there until like late game anyway. And by the time it's turn 5, like, okay, if you do kill my Warwalker, so what? Like, the only game that it actually died for me was when the game was already decided, right? I was moving everything up, going in for the kill. I was going for the objectives on like I think it was turn 3, bottom of turn 3. I just had a huge go turn. Like, I sent everything at my opponent because my opponent kind of overextended with Magnus and a couple of other, big beasties, Mutalith Vortex beasts, and killed them, right? Just annihilated them off the board. My Warwalkers were out in the open. He shot at a Warwalker and almost killed it. I actually got lucky and it lived, but he would have killed it the next turn, right? That's just a fact. It would have died. It had 3 wounds left. But even then, right, like by the time the Warwalker dies, it's usually later in the game, right? The early game, it lives because your opponent has bigger things to worry about. So it ends up actually accruing more value for its cost than you would think. So yeah, I think the Warwalker's very strong right now. I think it's a strong meta choice. I think its point decrease makes it at least semi-effective at dealing damage over the course of like 3 turns. Like, if you think about it, over the course of 3 turns, you're firing 6 Bright Lances off. Like, 4 of those are going to hit, 3 of those are going to wound against a vehicle. Your opponent probably makes 1 of those saves, and you throw 2d6 damage out against something. That's worth 85 points in my eyes, plus the added bonus of the armor negation. Yeah, the thumbs up. I think the Warwalker is definitely a good choice. Okay, also it has Scout, right? So Scout's always a little nifty thing you can do to get some extra deployment room in your deployments. Okay, next up, let's talk about the Wraithlord. The Wraithlord, my opinions on the Wraithlord, guys, haven't really changed that much. Although I do think now that solidly it does need some support. So it does need either a unit of Shroudrunners or a Warwalker to kind of help it do a little bit more damage. But I think if you're taking multiple Wraithlords, which in my opinion, that's the way to go, don't just take one. Take either two or three of them. Don't just take one. One is kind of like, yeah, it may do something for you, but your opponent is going to single it out and it's going to just kill it, right? If you have two or three Wraithlords, your opponent's not going to be able to realistically deal with it with one anti-large unit. It's going to require several anti-large units. And what this can actually do for you is it can open up your opponent's anti-large options for you to kill. So using two or three Wraithlords, putting them out there kind of like in cover, but near an objective, will bring your opponent's units out to play. And then at that point, once they bring their more vulnerable units or, more expensive and valuable units out to play, you can destroy them. And Wraithlords are not a guaranteed kill, right? Toughness 7, 2-up save. It does require a little bit of luck. There are things in the game that can absolutely demolish Wraithlords, no problem. But those things are expensive, right? They're not cheap. So yeah, Wraithlords, I think, are going to be A tier. Now, the only issue I see with Wraithlords is that they're really only powerful. I don't want to say they're only powerful in 2 detachments, but you're only going to take them in 2 detachments, which is Seer Council and Spirit Conclave, and occasionally Warhost. You might have a case for Wraithlords, but I think really the mainstay of the Wraithlord is going to be those 2 detachments. But I just think they're so good in those detachments that they make up for only being good in those specific ones. They're also really good with Farseers and Eldrad. So in my Seer Council list, for example, there's turns where I'll guide something, I'll doom something, and then I'll shoot 2 Wraithlords at it and blow it out of the water. Right? Like, I've had a Land Raider walk up to an objective, and I fired 2 Wraithlords and a Warwalker at it. I guided and doomed, of course. And even though my opponent used smoke, I still was able to just blow through his defenses and just kill the thing, right? So that's pretty good. And I wasn't rolling exceptionally well either. I think I only got 1 hit with the Warwalker. I didn't even wound with the Warwalker. And then with the Wraithlord's rerolls and all that, they were able to pick up 4 saves against the guy. And he did fail 2 of them, or 3 of them out of the 4, so I was able to just push through enough damage to be able to kill the, to kill the Land Raider. So it was a decent, okay, I'll say this. It was a decent roll. I rolled good for damage, but I used a command reroll on one of them, and honestly, I think it was an average result. That's just me personally. If you guys know the math on that better, let me know. But they've killed a lot more than I've expected. However, they have also whiffed in combat. I think one of the things about the Wraithlords is once they get out of range of that, once they get out of range of that Psyker when they charge into something and they're hitting on 4s, they do not do well. They really do need to hit on 3s, preferably 2s. Which is why I think you kind of need to use them in synergy with other stuff. If you're just using Wraithlord's base for 140 points, they're just okay. I think if, without synergies, accounting for synergies and stuff, I think they're probably in B tier, like high B tier. But when you account for the things you're already going to take in your army, things like Doom, perhaps things like Guide, because of course, like I said, you're going to take a Farseer in Guardian Battle Host, you're going to take a Farseer in Seer Council, right? You might even take a Farseer in Spirit Conclave. And I think if you do that, the Wraithlord is excellent. So I'm going to put him in A tier, but he's probably kind of lower on A tier. And let's reorganize some of this stuff here. Honestly, put the Death Jester a little ahead of the Spiritseer here. Yeah, I think that's about right. And then, yeah, I think actually, weirdly enough, I think they're in kind of the positions I want them to be in. I'm going to put the Visarch last, though. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the Viper. The Viper is B tier. I like the Viper. It's cheap. It's only 75 or 65 points. So at 65 points, it's a decent harassment unit, but it's really just better for objectives, right? It's a tough little vehicle for its cost. It's tough, right? 65 points for this little thing. Not bad when you consider, objectives that you need to score over the course of a turn. So things like sabotage are really good with the Viper because it could just kind of hide in a piece of terrain and it can score you a sabotage point. But other than that, it's really only good in Windrider Host because you can pick it up and drop it at any time. So like it has infinite uppy downy in the Windrider Host detachment. So I think it's good in that detachment. I don't think it's that good in other detachments. So personally, I think the Viper's just lower B tier. It's again, it's okay in its own detachment. It's pretty good in its own detachment. It's good for like one or two things, but it's not necessary. It's not like a super strong unit or anything like that. So yeah, I think B tier is probably where it belongs. It really does miss, weirdly enough, it misses the rerolls from the index. In the index, it was more expensive, but it was also harder hitting. All right, let's talk about the Wave Serpent. Okay, so the Wave Serpent is, it's hard to say because I think it's a good model, but I'm going to put it in B tier. And I'm going to put it in higher B tier. It is going to be higher up. But basically, here's my thought process behind the Wave Serpent. It is really good. But with the current nerfs to Ynnari, I think it's not really going to be used in Ynnari anymore. I don't think people are going to use Wave Serpents in Ynnari. I think it's good in two detachments, Aspect Host and War Host, because of the ability to hop out, shoot, and then get back in the transport. That's it. As far as its points cost, it's 125 points, which is, in my opinion, a little bit too expensive. I think they over-nerfed it when they nerfed it in the beginning when the rules came out. I think it's really not that many points. It doesn't do a lot of damage. Its durability is there, but it's only durable against certain targets. Against things that have just a bunch of strength 9 attacks, it doesn't do anything for it. And, the invul is nice as well, but it's only a 5-up. So the Wave Serpent is good, don't get me wrong. I think it's good, and I think it's really good in Aspect Host and War Host. I think it is probably required material for either of those detachments. I just personally don't think it works anywhere else. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I don't think it's that good in other detachments. Maybe, I will say this, maybe Guardian Battle Host if you're running Asurmen and like Dire Avengers, but even then, I don't think it's required. Like, I think Asurmen and Dire Avengers can just hop out by themselves, hop in and out behind a wall and be fine. Like, I've run Asurmen and Dire Avengers in Seer Council, and let me tell you guys, it works fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Just being able to hop in and out of a wall. Being in a Wave Serpent isn't always the best thing for numerous reasons. First of all, if you get charged, it really sucks. So in normal circumstances, if you're outside of a Wave Serpent, you can put a wall in between yourself and the opponent, which means you can be 1.1 inches away and you can be harder to charge. If you're in a Wave Serpent, you can't really do that. It's a lot harder to do because of the shape of the Wave Serpent. So a lot of times what will happen is your opponent will just charge the Wave Serpent, kill it, and then your guys will get out, they'll take some mortal wound damage, they'll be battle shocked so they can't overwatch, and then your opponent can actually, they wouldn't be able to overwatch anyway, but they can't use any stratagems is the point. And then your opponent can also pile in or possibly even, wrap them up into combat, consolidate, right? They can just consolidate into you, which a lot of factions have 6-inch consolidate, which sucks, right? Or they could just it's a big unit, right? Big squad of Dire Avengers and Asurmen. They could just consolidate into 3 inches and possibly be in range. So, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that in certain detachments, but I do think obviously the Wave Serpent has a place. It's only an aspect host and war host, in my honest opinion. If you guys have other opinions about it, let me know. But personally, I don't think it does much outside of those two detachments. Okay, let's look at the D cannon. The D cannon needs some buffs, but I do think it's better than some of these things. So I actually would put it here. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it right behind the... Well, no. You know what? Boom. And here's my reasoning behind it. I think it sucks, don't get me wrong. I think it's really unreliable. But it is faster than it was before. If you guys remember from previous... In the index, it was like movement 3. It's also infantry. So that means it can benefit from a lot of stratagems, which is kind of funny. It doesn't have a whole lot of attacks, but it can benefit from some strats. So the other thing about it is it can join Guardian squads, right? So it can be kind of protected by Guardian squads. It can't benefit from the Farseer's Strands of Fate ability, but it does get affected by things like Guide. So it can get a little bit of a bonus to hit because it doesn't have heavy anymore, so it doesn't get that automatic bonus. It also has indirect fire, which isn't terrible. It has D3 attacks and it has blast. So typically speaking, you're going to get a decent number of attacks out of this thing if you roll average. So if you roll, that 3 or 4 on the D3, you're going to do some decent damage with it. It's very high strength, strength 16, AP -4. And of course, having dev wounds is not as good as it was in the index, obviously, but it's still pretty decent. It can deal some good damage over the course of the game if you can keep it alive. And I think that's really where it has its value. If you do choose to put a D cannon in your list, it is a very expensive choice, but over the course of the game, if your Guardian Defenders survive long enough, it will do significant damage, right? So that's kind of my thing about it. I think that it's definitely overlooked because of the fact that it's so expensive, but it's not terrible. It's not terrible, it's just way too expensive, right? I think actually this thing should probably be closer to 100 points rather than 125. I just think for 125 it's too much. The other thing is that its ability only affects Titanic units and not vehicles. I think if it was a vehicle type of ability, I think it'd be a little bit better, but because it only affects Titanic units and because you can only reroll a damage roll of 1 against Titanic units, I think its ability is basically just nothing. But yeah, D3 attacks, you're probably going to get 2 attacks out of it. You may get 2 hits if you're able to get Guide and stuff like that. And 2 hits at strength 16, AP -4, D6 plus 2 damage is not bad. But having said that, overall, I do think it needs buffs. Okay, let's look at the Vibro Cannon. The Vibro Cannon is, in my opinion, only decent in 2 detachments, Guardian Battle Host and Seer Council. However, I still don't think it's that good. I don't know. I've tried them out myself. I think they do decent damage, but they're kind of just out there dicks in the wind after they do what they do, and they're easy kills, and they just, honestly, they need to get kind of lucky, right? Like, they need buffs. If you have an army that's set up to give them Guide and Doom, they can do a lot of damage. They can do a lot of work with Guide and Doom. But even then, because they have D6 attacks, it's really random. If you have one bad turn of shooting with these guys, you're probably going to lose a couple of them because they're just so easy to kill. Now, having said that, I do think that a good player can line these things up in a safe position and also be able to fire over multiple turns of the game. They're also pretty cheap. They're only 60 points. So they're also able to do objectives and stuff like that. So they're not completely too expensive to be, kind of used for that purpose. So yeah, Vibro Cannons I think are decent. I think they're definitely better than the D Cannon. I'd probably put them in B tier, but like low B tier. I think they're like one of those units that can work in a couple of detachments. Weirdly enough, I think Guardian Battle Hosts, they're pretty good in because you're going to have a lot of Guardian squads and you could just have this thing come back from reserve after you stick it in a Guardian unit. It also basically forces your opponent to not be able to discard Cold the Horde, so your opponent has to keep Cold the Horde if you have this thing in a Guardian squad with some Warlocks, especially with the new Cold the Horde mechanic in the June balanced data slate. So yeah, I think this thing is actually pretty decent at 60 points. I don't think it's great, but I definitely think you can stick a couple of these in your Guardian Battle Host. You can stick a couple of these in your maybe Seer Council, and they're not that bad. So yeah, absolutely. I just think it needs a little bit of synergy. So having Eldrad, having Guardians, and a Farseer in your list is definitely going to help these guys out big time. Okay, let's talk about the Shadowweaver. The Shadowweaver for me is also a C tier unit, but I'm actually going to put it on the upper level of C tier. And the reason why is because the Shadowweaver, I think I said Shadowseer, the Shadowweaver has a really hit or miss ability. Like, its ability is actually really good against light infantry. So we've been seeing a lot of light infantry stuff. We've been seeing Poxwalkers. We have been seeing Zangors. We have been seeing a lot of these types of units that are like, you know, very like skirmishy, like fodder type units. And I think the Shadowweaver does have value into those units because it has a good number of attacks. It has blast. And it also forces them, if they want to move the next turn, they have to take mortal wounds. So basically, if they roll a 1 when they move, for every model they roll a 1 for, they take a mortal wound and damage. So basically what this can amount to is, let's say they have a unit of 10 Zangors that is on the battlefield. You hit it with the Shadowweaver. You kill like 2 of them maybe, right? You kill 2, and then next turn, they move up, and they're going to have to roll 8 dice. They're probably going to, maybe they lose 1 more Zangor, right? All right, they lose 1 more Zangor. Then they use the Thousand Suns ability to allow that unit to move again, so they can get onto an objective. They roll the dice again. Maybe they lose a couple more Zangors, right? So all of a sudden, that squad that was at full strength is now at half strength. That may not seem very great, but it lowers their damage to the point where now they probably can't kill that Aspect Warrior unit. So now they're going to have to dedicate something else to it. So it does enough damage to those like cheap units to make sure that those cheap units can't actually kill your Aspect Warriors anymore. So I think that in and of itself is worth it. Having said that, I think it's very hit or miss. It's one of those things you're really relying on the dice rolls. You're really relying on your opponent just absolutely whiffing all of their, you know, movement rolls. You're counting on a high damage roll, or not damage, but you're counting on rolling enough attacks to actually hit the target and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it can be good in some cases. I've had games where I've run one of these and it did really well. It killed like way more than its points value in Eldar models. I've also run this against my Space Marine buddy, and it basically did nothing all game. Like, there was a time where it actually did no damage. I shot it for 5 turns in a row, and every single turn, it just failed to produce anything because of either bad rolls on my part or good rolls on my opponent's part. Sometimes my opponent didn't even want to move that unit anyway. It was just on an objective, so he didn't even have to take the tests, right? So I think it's just one of those units that, again, it's 75 points. It's very niche, though. It's very niche. All right, let's talk about the Fire Prism. The Fire Prism, guys, I'm going to put it in C tier, but it's going to be upper C tier. I was a little bit harsh on this thing in the beginning of the, you know, edition, or, you know, basically when we got our new codex, I was really harsh on it because it got a lot of nerfs. The linked fire got nerfed. The rerolls got nerfed. The fate dice got nerfed. Everything got nerfed, and this thing just sucked for this, about the same cost. It was 10 points cheaper. Now it's 150. I think for 150 it is better, but I don't think it changes the dynamic, which is, what does this thing actually do against hard targets? Like, if I was going to shoot this thing, which is 150 points, at a Mutalith Vortex Beast that is 160, am I going to get at least half of its wounds taken out? And that's basically the math I always do, guys. By the way, this is kind of the math you should do on long-range units. Long-range units should deal about half their cost worth of damage to an ideal target. The ideal targets of a Fire Prism are monsters and vehicles. So if I shoot 2 shots at a Mutalith Vortex Beast, let's say I hit both times, I wound both times, again, it's rare that I do that, but let's say that I do that. What happens? Well, they get a 5+ invulnerable save. So maybe I don't even wound both, but let's assume that I get both wounds in. They also get a 5+ feel no pain for all those. So basically what ends up happening here is there's a good chance they're going to, pass one of the invuls, and then they take 6 feel no pains and they pass 4 of them, so they only take 4 damage. And that's not enough. That is simply not enough damage for 150 points worth of shooting. And honestly, there's targets out there that are even worse. So there's targets that have 4+ invuls. Your opponent could easily just make both, right? So the Fire Prism, I think, is decent, and I do put it on the upper end of C tier. I would probably put it on the lower end of B tier if I was being generous. I think it has play in things like Ynnari, especially the new Ynnari, how it's going to be more of a shooting faction. But I have to say, it's still not super good. And mostly that's just because it doesn't have the volume of fire that other, heavy tank dealing units have, like heavy tank busting units, It doesn't for example, it's 150 points. Let's compare it to a Gladiator Lancer. A Gladiator Lancer against a hard target is going to get rerolls because of its, army ability. It's going to get Oath of Moment. But even without Oath of Moment, it still gets a significant amount of extra effects. Like, I believe the Lancer gets +1 to wound or something like that against a target. Its weapons don't have the flat damage. They have D6 damage. But then it has more shots. Like, there's other weapons on the platform. It's also a tougher vehicle, right? There's just a lot more things that model has that the Fire Prism doesn't have access to. And the Gladiator Lancer, by the way, is not a competitive model. It's just decent. It's just the best point of comparison. So yeah, I just don't really like the Fire Prism. I know that the Disperse Shot is pretty good. I know a lot of people say, oh, the Disperse Shot is great at killing Marines. I mean, it's okay at killing Marines, right? It's 2d6, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2. So, on average, you're rolling, 7 attacks, maybe 5 of them hit, 4 of them, more likely, 4 of them wound. So let's say 4 wound. You're going to get about 2 kills with that if they're in cover. It's okay. I mean, killing 2 Space Marines is okay, right? Maybe 3 if they're out in the open. But it's just not that great, right? I think there's better ways that you can spend 150 points, especially with Warwalkers going down to 85. I think you could almost afford 2 Warwalkers for every Fire Prism. And Warwalkers are just, in my opinion, better. Okay, let's talk about the Night Spinner. The Night Spinner is C tier. I'll put it on the lower end of C tier. I don't think it needs a redesign, but it's way too expensive for what it is. It's 190 points. It needs to go down in points, essentially. So I could see this very well being 170 and being a balanced model. I think for 170, it may give people reason to take one of them in their list to slow down things. Again, we're in a meta with a lot of melee, a lot of models wanting to charge in. Giving something a -2 to their movement and charge values is actually really powerful. It really does neuter things like Blood Angels, Death Guard. It can really stop them from moving very fast at all. So I do like the Night Spinner on paper, but it's just too expensive. It's way too costly. And for the same cost, you can get almost 2 Aspect Warrior. Well, you can get 2 Aspect Warrior units of pretty much any other type except for the most expensive ones. So Shining Spears, Fire Dragons, Crimson Hunter, right? But other than that, mostly you can get 2 other aspects of any other type. So what you have to decide is, do I want to slow an enemy down, or do I want something in a position to kill my opponent? And most of the time, people they just want to eliminate the target, right, for much less points. So yeah, the Night Spinner is not very good. It needs serious buffs, but I don't think it needs a redesign. I don't think it needs to go back to the drawing board as far as what it does. I think what it does is fine. It's just too weak. Okay, let's talk about the Wraith Knight. Now, there's 2 Wraith Knight variants. There's the sword and board and the gun. Let's just talk about both of them at the same time. We'll kind of rank them side by side. My personal opinion is that the sword version is C tier and the gun version is C tier. I think they're both the same, and I think they're pretty low on the list. Now, I have heard from some people that have had success with these things, and glory be unto you if you've had any sort of success with these guys. I've run them in so many games, and they fail me every time. Now, some games, it was my fault. I moved them out too early, they got popped. Some games, though, they survived the entire game, they did everything that they could do, and they still didn't get their value in points or objectives. And they just didn't do as much as more Wraithguard or Wraithblades or any other unit in the game or our codex would have done. And I think the problem with the Wraith Knight now is that it really just doesn't survive well. Like, even with the -1 damage that it gets from the shield, it doesn't have good survivability. Its survivability is extremely low. Even -1 damage, it just gets popped by things that have multiple damage profiles. It's very big, it's very easy to shoot, and the ranged weapons that it gets aren't that good either. The Sun Cannon, I've tried all the variants. I've tried the Sun Cannon variant, the Sword and Shield, I've tried the Sword and Gun, I've tried 2 heavy Wraith Cannons. They just all suck, guys. And the main reason is just this thing doesn't do its points worth in damage, and it's much easier to kill. It takes much less points to actually kill it than it costs. So it's 435 for the gun variant, it's 420 for the sword variant. Each and every time it's cost my opponent less points to shoot or assault it in combat than it actually costs. And it always dies, basically. There was one game where it survived, where I got really lucky on 4+ invuls, but that's pretty much it. And I've run this thing in at least 6 or 7 games, and it's just, it's not good, guys. There's a reason why a lot of people aren't bringing it to the table. It just has absolutely no synergy with most detachment bonuses, and yeah, I think it's, weirdly enough, it probably works best in the Ynnari, and that's about it, right? It's kind of cool that this thing can benefit from, you know, the Ynnari abilities and some of the stratagems and stuff, but other than that, it's just not that great. Okay, let's go ahead and look at Wraithblades. So Wraithblades are actually one of those units that I think are really good, specifically in their own detachment. So in the Spirit Conclave, they're one of the best units in their class. Having said that, even though they do a lot of damage, they're not very durable, right? A lot of armies are now outfitted to deal with high toughness 3-wound infantry. Wraithblades fit the bill. They don't survive very long. A lot of armies can take them out rather easily. So they're not super durable. They're also pretty expensive at 170. They're more expensive than regular Terminators, guys. And regular Terminators have a lot more range damage, and they can also punch you in melee combat as well. They also have invuls. Regular Terminators, I think, are 155 points. And guys, regular Terminators aren't good. People don't take regular Terminators. There is a reason for this. Wraithblades are kind of the same. The only difference is they get more movement and they get different access to battle shot or battle token abilities, battle focus abilities when they're near Psykers, which does make them a little bit better in terms of mobility and utility. And they do have a fight on death ability, which is pretty good. 3-up fight on death, which is cool. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think they're good in their detachment. They do good damage. The swords do really good damage against Space Marines. The axes don't do great damage, but you have the invul save, so they're a little tiny bit more durable with that. And yeah, that's basically it. I think most of the time, though, you give these guys the swords, and they'll do pretty well for you. Let's talk about Wraithguard. So there's 2 types of Wraithguard. I'm going to put these guys in B tier as well. They're a little bit behind Wraithblades in my opinion, but the D sites are excellent. You put the D sites in a Warhost list, and they're great. You put them in a Spirit Conclave list, and they're great. But the Wraith Cannons aren't so good. So the Wraith Cannons, I think, are a little bit, they're just worse Fire Dragons, I would say. They're more expensive. They do less damage. They're less consistent. You need more buffs, right? You need to be near a Psyker. And the only upside is Wraithguard are more durable. But you are also paying 50 points for that durability. So, Yeah, fire dragons are just, in my honest opinion, better for dealing damage to large units than wraith cannons, and the extra toughness doesn't matter because they're probably going to die anyway. I've played these guys in a few games. Honestly, the D-sites are awesome, but they still die, right? And I mean, they die and they do a lot of damage, which is fine. But the wraith cannons, oh, they just don't do a lot of damage. So it's hard to justify a unit like that when they're not doing enough damage to warrant their use in battle. Okay. Oh, and their ability just isn't that good, right? Just being able to just fall back and shoot. I just don't find it that effective, right? I just don't find it that effective. So it's a good ability to have in some cases, but a lot of times if someone's going to charge into you, they're just going to kill you, right? They're just going to kill you. Okay, let's talk about Dire Avengers. So Dire Avengers, I'm actually going to make a video about these guys later because I think they are needing of something, and I think they just lack direction. I think they're one of the aspect warriors that, a lot of aspect warriors, they have a clear defined role in the battlefield. Dire Avengers do not. Dire Avengers just are supposed to be the damage dealing aspect, but we have so much stuff that deals damage and does other stuff, right? So like usually when you're trying to pick units for your army, you're going to pick units that do 2 or more roles effectively, right? They either do damage and screen, they either do damage and score objectives, they score objectives and move block, they move block and whatever it is, right? They're going to do 2 or more things. Dire Avengers only do one thing, which is deal damage. On top of that, their damage isn't that good, right? Against a lot of targets, their damage just is nothing. They basically have the intercessor problem, and I'm going to make a video kind of comparing them to intercessors. I don't like comparing units to intercessors typically because we're a completely different faction. We work in completely different ways than other factions, but I think it's probably a good comparison just to kind of show you guys why Dire Avengers don't really have a purpose. And that's because no one really cares about a unit that can deal damage against other light infantry units. Basically, right? They have to do 1 or more things. So like Swooping Hawks are good because they can deal damage to infantry, but they can also put wounds on harder targets because they have lethal hits, and they're good at screening, move blocking, and scoring objectives. They're good at they check all the boxes, right? Dire Avengers only check 1 box. They're only good at heavy infantry or light infantry, right? Like things with a 4-up save or worse, they're good into. And even then, they need damage buffs in the form of Norse cover or lethal hits or other things like that to make them anywhere near what they should be for the points. And they're 80 points per 5. So they cost just as much as a unit of Intercessor Marines. These guys are expensive. So I'm going to put these guys in C tier, but they're going to be on the kind of more upper end of C tier. I would put them ahead of the Shadowweaver. So they're only really good in 1 detachment. And I would say that detachment is, weirdly enough, Ynnari. Well, yeah, I would say Ynnari and like maybe Warhost, but only Warhost because of Asurmen. Like, that's it. Otherwise, they're just kind of attacks for Asurmen to be able to do a bunch of damage and just sponge damage for the unit, right? Otherwise, they really don't do that much. I think 44 attacks going out it sounds really insane, right? Squad of 10 of these guys puts out 44 attacks. However, if you don't have the sustained hits ability, which only activates within 9 inches, it is kind of hard to get within 9 with all of the whole squad. Then on top of that, if you give them a stratagem like lethal hits, that could be good. But that's not available in every detachment, right? It's only available in Aspect Host for the lethal hits and Ynnari. So again, I think they can be good. I just find that a lot of lists don't end up using them because there's just better options, right? For 80 points, for 5 more points, you can just get Swooping Hawks that have lethal hits base and they have a lot more other stuff, They also do mortal wounds when they fly near you. Dark Reapers are also 80 points for 5. Dark Reapers do a ton of damage. Or maybe they're 85 points. I can't exactly remember the exact point of Dark Reapers, but they're cheap, right? They're not that expensive is the point. I think they actually are 80 points, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, maybe 85. Maybe 85. But, you know, they're only 5 more points than Dire Avengers, and they do a lot more. Dire Avengers really just, honestly, just don't do what most armies need them to do. And that's why they're in C tier. I'm going to go into more detail about that in a future video where I talk about why Dire Avengers suck. But I think, honestly, if they got a points decrease, if they went down to 70 points, I think they'd be good again. And just because of the fact that they're cheap enough to warrant having a unit of 5 that can just kill a unit of cultists or something like that, right? Like having a fairly cheap aspect warrior unit that can deal with other skirmishers is something that could be usable if it was cheap enough. Okay, let's talk about Wind Riders. Wind Riders are going to be A tier. Really strong unit, specifically in Wind Rider host, but they're also strong in other detachments as well. They're not typically received well in other detachments because they don't have stratagem support, but they kind of have their own stratagem with their ability. Being able to reroll hits and having shuriken cannons is one of the best combos in the game, just because you can reroll and you can fish for 6s. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a unit of 3. If I have 80 points left over in my army and I'm like, what do I not have? And, you know, I have my fire dragons, I have my, you know, I have this, I have that. I'm like, you know what? If I don't already have Shroud Runners, usually it's, if I have 80 points left over, I just get Shroud Runners. But if I already have them, then I pick up a squad of Wind Riders, because I'm telling you guys, they have never done nothing for me. They've always done something. I put 3 in reserve, and I just leave them there until I need them. And whenever turn 2, turn 3 comes around, I bring them out, and they usually are able to finish something off, because the combination of lethal hits and rerolls hits on the closest enemy unit is a killer combo. So, you know, you're getting 9 attacks, maybe you get 1 or 2 6s, then you follow that up, you get 1 or 2 more. Then on top of that, you're rolling to wound. And if you're rolling to wound against a doomed target or a guided target, you're going to do even more damage. And then your opponent ends up taking like 5 or 6 saves. So if your opponent only has like 4 wounds left, like chances are they're going to die from this, right? So yeah, and most of the time, a unit that I'm like going after is going to be something big, like Magnus or Mortarion, or, you know, anything else that's like really a Mutalith Vortex Beast, something that I just need a few extra wounds to finish off. And they always do it. They always manage to get the kill. And I know that may be a personal experience thing, but the math also backs that up. Because if you're forcing through 6 saves at -1 against a vehicle or monster, chances are they're going to fail a couple of those and take at least 4 damage, which is usually just enough to finish it off. So yeah, I think these guys are strong in pretty much every detachment. Specifically, though, in Wind Rider host, they're just absolute lawnmowers. They'll just they'll just mow through everything, right? They're really good in Wind Rider host, but they're also just good in general. So that's why they're an A tier. Really good unit. Also, I mean, if you want to play it more safe with them, scatter lasers, having 3 scatter lasers with rerolls hits is not bad either. All right, let's talk about Jain Zar. Jain Zar is extremely good. She's going to be top of A tier for me. Now, the reason I don't put her in S tier is because I think with all the points increases, we're really searching for ways to make our armies cheaper, but also at the same time perform just as well in the roles that we have them in. And with Banshees specifically, with the increased in cost of Banshees and her points being 105, I think it's getting to the point where it's 200 points for a squad of Banshees and her in it, which is a lot. And weirdly enough, I think even though the Autarch also got an increase in points, I still think the Autarch is probably the better pick in most lists. Having said that, Jain Zar is a beast. Like, she easily makes up that 20-point difference. It's just that in some detachments, you also want the extra added bonus of being able to get a free stratagem, like a free grenade strat or a free overwatch with a aspect token on a fusion gun is always really a good thing to have in your back pocket. But Jain Zar is really strong, and she's definitely like top of A tier, bottom of S tier for me personally. I love her. Auto Advance 6 is excellent. She has reroll wounds against characters for both her range attack and melee attack. And lastly, and probably one of my little favorite things about her, is that she just obliterates things with anti-infantry 3+. So she still has anti-infantry 3+, and she has 8 attacks, which is double the amount of the Autarch on foot. So she definitely does more damage than him. I think my one gripe about her is that her base size is so freaking big that she really does need to be able to charge around Ruin sometimes, and that can mess up your charge. So I've had situations where all of my Banshees have been able to fit into combat, and Jain Zar, because she has a huge ass base, needs to use an aspect token to pile in 6 inches. I know that seems weird, but usually she has to use the aspect token. It's not a big deal. Like, you just use the aspect token. But in some cases, it's like, what if I wanted to use that next turn for something else, right? So there are a few things that are a little bit weird about her. But yeah, I think in general, she's definitely a very strong unit. You won't see her in every list, but she's very strong. And I think, definitely A tier. All right, let's talk about Shining Spears. Shining Spears, I'm going to save you guys most of the trouble on this. I think these guys are B tier. They did get a points drop, which is nice, but they're still just, a couple of rerolls short of being a great unit. They're very hit or miss. Because they're a combat unit, they usually only get one chance to shine, and that's it. If they blow it, they're dead. And on top of that, they have a large base size. So it's still, even though they can move through walls and stuff and fly, it's still difficult to fit a base in between a ruined wall sometimes. So that is something that is sometimes an issue. They do significant damage against things that are, monsters that have a lowish armor save, but usually you don't see that in the game. You don't see vehicles or monsters with something that less than a 3-up save. So they're hard pressed to actually get real kills against these types of units. I have used Shining Spears in several of my games. I'm not just saying that they're bad on paper. I have used them in probably about 8 or 9 games now. They did great in 3 of them. They did awful in about 6 or 7 games. Which, by that I mean they charged in, they didn't kill their target, and they died. And they didn't really do anything except via, they weren't even a speed bump because my opponent just used them as a as a distance multiplier to get where they wanted to go. So yeah, the Shining Spears, I think they can be good. I know that people have taken them to events and been successful with them, but I think that they're really only good in 2 detachments: Windrider Host and Aspect Host. Aspect Host because they really need the rerolls, and Windrider Host because they have access to advance and charge and some of the other things that might give them an advantage so that their large base sizes aren't as much of an issue. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about Banshees. Banshees are S tier. They're a really powerful unit. Fights first with anti-infantry. They hit on 2+. It's just a really deadly combination. They're good into almost everything Marine. And they're even good into Terminators. They're just a fantastic unit. They did get a small increase in points lately, or recently. They are 95 instead of, 90 as they were before. But even for 95, they're a fantastic unit. And they are a meta staple, which means that you need them in your list. You should have at least 1 squad of Howling Banshees in every single list you play as an Aeldari player. Honestly, they are that good. They will never let you down. Even in things like Spirit Conclave, a unit of Howling Banshees, a well-placed unit of Howling Banshees, can absolutely guarantee that you'll hold that objective from melee units. They're fantastic. The Exarch being able to do damage 3 with her weapon and also being able to aspect token something, guaranteeing pretty much every time, 50% of the time, guaranteeing 9 damage on an enemy unit is amazing. It means they can actually punch up into vehicles, which is really weird to think about. But they can, because, Banshee hitting 3 times, wounding once, and then popping an aspect token for another, you can deal up to 6 damage to an enemy tank, which is incredible. So, Banshees, even though they've been nerfed recently, I still think are a fantastic unit. They're one of the best in the game as far as melee goes. And also, again, like heroic intervention, right? Being able to fight first, defending an objective, putting them behind a wall, being basically unchargeable unless your opponent wants to just be slaughtered, right? All are good reasons why Howling Banshees are just a meta-defining unit. Okay, let's talk about the Warlock Conclave. The Warlock Conclave, in my opinion, very strong unit, A tier. Why is it A tier, even though it's only good in 2 or 3 detachments? It's because it's one of the best ways of dealing with high toughness units in the game, because of how you're going to build the unit. So, of course, the Warlock Conclave in and of itself, if you look at it just on paper, doesn't really look that good. But when you start factoring in different combinations that you can do in detachments like Seer Council, in detachments like Guardian Battle Host, with the support of units like Warwalkers and Shroudrunners, you get a way better picture of how hard these guys can hit. These guys, on average, 4 of them, can put out 22 attacks. Strength 7, AP -1, damage 1, which can be boosted with other AP boosting abilities like a Warwalker. So against a heavy unit of Death Shrouds, for example, a squad of Guardians with Eldrad and 4 of these guys can, quite easily manage to kill about 3 of them in a single activation. Of course, you'll need some assistance with things like Warwalkers and Shroudrunners, but you should be able to kill 3, and sometimes maybe you even get lucky enough, you might put some wounds on the Lord of Contagion itself. Also, not to mention the -1 to wound that the Warlock Conclave gives either Guardian Defenders or Storm Guardians when they're also included with a Farseer or Eldrad. So that is really good as well. -1 to wound is a good defensive buff for a generally defensive unit. Okay, let's talk about the Crimson Hunter. So the Crimson Hunter is going to be B tier, specifically because it's good in Aspect Host. I think it's really good with the combination of rerolls and +1 to hit, +1 to wound against flying targets that we're seeing in our meta. Things like Magnus, things like Fetid Bloat Drones, there's a lot of flying stuff now that's really good in these new codexes. We're seeing Blood Angels start to be a little bit resurgent, right? Blood Angels have a lot of flying infantry. The Crimson Hunter is actually pretty good for cutting these units down to size. They're not as good against, infantry units as they are against vehicles and stuff, but they are decent. Having said that, they're only good in Aspect Host. I don't think Aspect Host is an incredibly competitive detachment, personally. And I've said this from the beginning. I think it can be good. Don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people have had success with Aspect Host. I'm not trying to take that away from them or anything. I just don't see it win many events. And I think that's simply because at some point, you're going to run out of steam. It's one of those lists that revolves heavily around doing enough damage fast enough to achieve a victory, because they have almost no defensive stratagems whatsoever. The detachment is pretty barren as far as most of the defensive or utility stratagems. It's all offense all the time, and sometimes that's not enough to win games. So although I do think it is good in Aspect Host, it's a good model in Aspect Host, I don't necessarily think Aspect Host is the best detachment. Okay. Oh, I guess I should mention the real reason the Crimson Hunter is taken is because it ignores line of sight. It's a flyer, right? So it ignores obscuring terrain. So if you have a model that's behind obscuring terrain, flyers can draw line of sight to it, which is why Crimson Hunters are good in Aspect Host. It's also why people run the Void Raven Bomber in the Drukhari armies or Drukhari detachments because it ignores line of sight and it does a ton of damage. Okay, let's move on to Storm Guardians. Storm Guardians are S tier. I'll have no argument about it. And the reason why I put them in S tier is because they functionally are pretty much an auto-include unit. Most armies need at least one unit of Storm Guardians to be successful. Reason being is they have sticky objectives. It's the same reason why people take Intercessors in Space Marine armies. It's not for the damage, guys. It's not for screening. It's not for move blocking. It's because they have sticky objective, and it's definitely not for the damage, right? I'll just reiterate that twice. Storm Guardians don't do a ton of damage, especially since they lost their rerolls from the index. But they're a great utility unit. They're a great screen for the backfield. They're a really good unit for putting pressure on your opponent by sticking in objectives, and they're a great house for Eldrad and a Warlock Conclave. So they work really good in Guardian Battle Host, Seer Council, and pretty much any other detachment. The only thing you're going to change up from Seer Council, Guardian Battle Host to the other detachments is the Warlocks, right? So in most detachments, you're going to have Storm Guardians in the list, but they may just, they may or may not have a Warlock Conclave, right? You may be using them just for a backfield screening unit or for a sticky objective unit, and that's it. They're cheap. They're only 100 points. They come with 2 fusion guns, 2 flamers, 2 power weapons, and the 5+ invulnerable save Serpent shield. They're very durable for the cost. And they're good in every detachment. Straight up. They're an auto-include in every single detachment. The only detachment I'd say where you probably don't take them is Quins. But even then, you may want Storm Guardians for a backfield screen. Alrighty, let's talk about Guardian Defenders. Guardian Defenders are going to be B tier. They are, in my honest opinion, the definition of detachment specific. They're good in Seer Council because they're great to have with the Farseer and Warlocks. They're great in Guardian Battle Host because Guardian Battle Host loves Guardians and they have a lot of bonuses from their detachment and the stratagems and so forth. But that's about it. They're not a unit that you typically see in other detachments because they don't have sticky, so they don't have that extra utility. And their ability to fade back after they've been shot is really not that useful because they're not really shot at that much, right? They're literally a unit that likes to screen the backfield. Their damage is not good, right? Their damage is not that great. Even with a Farseer, you're doing, again, maybe you're killing a couple of Space Marines with their shooting attacks. You're not really killing that much. And on the flip side, they're really, really squishy. They're not like Storm Guardians. They don't have a 5+ invul save. So you're pretty much, if you get caught out in the open, you're losing the whole unit. So they're going to be hidden most of the game behind ruins. They're going to be mostly, like their name suggests, a defender unit. They're going to be defending a certain area of the board from enemy attack. That means that really they're only going to be useful in a couple of different detachments that don't already have units that are going to be doing that anyway, right? So, yeah, Guardian Battle Host, Seer Council, I think they're really good in those because of the stratagem and, detachment synergies. But other than that, outside of that, I don't think they're all that great. Okay, let's talk about Dark Reapers. Dark Reapers are S tier. They're another S tier unit. I'd actually put them... I'm going to rearrange this a little bit. I actually think Storm Guardians are more S tier than... Well, no. I think Howling Banshees are obviously auto-required in almost every list. Storm Guardians are like the next. Dark Reapers are the next after that. Dark Reapers are good for one reason and one reason alone. They do exceptional damage, and damage 3 is a very sought-after damage profile because it does good damage against vehicles, it does good damage against heavy infantry, and it hits a lot of those important breakpoints, right? When we talk about damage breakpoints, it's really good against a lot of things. So like 2 wound models with feel no pain. Damage 3 punches right through that typically on average rolls. Damage, wound 3 models punches right through them. Vehicles with 9 wounds. Well, you know, as we know our basic math skills, our basic arithmetic, 3 times 3 is 9. So it only takes 3 failed saves from a unit of these guys to put a 9 wound vehicle in the ground. 12 wound vehicles are also pretty common, or 11 wound vehicles, and only takes 4 failed saves from a unit of Dark Reapers to put that in the ground. They're very effective against those targets. They're really good, especially against stuff that's toughness 9, but they can deal with things that are toughness 10. They ignore all hit modifiers, all negative hit modifiers, and they ignore cover, which essentially gives them an extra AP. So they're AP minus 2 base, and they get a pseudo AP for ignoring cover. So a lot of 3+ armor saves are going to 5 up, and if you hit them with Warwalkers, like I stated earlier on, you're going to be doing minus 3 with ignores cover, so they're going to be on a 6 up save, which is, you know, much harder to make than a 5 up. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, Dark Reapers are exceptionally good. They have exceptional range as well. They're really good with an Autarch if you want to, you know, kind of bring them in and out of a Wave Serpent in Warhost or Aspect Host. Or if you want to run them in a list like Seer Council, they're really good just by themselves. Or if you want to put some extra points into it, Maugan Ra. Maugan Ra is also a pretty good option for these guys. He's cheap. He's only 100 points. And I think he brings a lot of extra utility damage to the unit. So being able to do the mortal wound splash damage may not seem like a big deal, but your opponent has to be aware of it, has to space their models out accordingly. And also, you know, over the course of the game, if you shoot all 5 turns, on average, you're going to get an extra 4 mortal wounds out of that unit. Okay, let's talk about the Hemlock Wraith Fighter. Hemlock Wraith Fighter's D tier. Needs a redesign badly. It's not able to hit effectively. It doesn't have the ability that allows it to get +1 when near Psychers, even though for some odd reason, it is being piloted by a Spiritseer itself. So it doesn't make sense that it hits on 4s. Its ability is trash as well. It only works within 9 inches, so it can't be used when it comes in from reserve. And it's a Battle Shock test at -1. Well, it's not even a Battle Shock test. It's just, if you're within 9, you have -1 to your Battle Shock tests. That's it. Other than that, its weapons are very swingy. They're D6 each with blast, but unfortunately, they hit on 4s. So you're not going to get many attacks with this thing in the first place. You're going to get probably about, let's say against an infantry unit, you get about 8. And of those, only 4 hit. You're just not doing that much damage. And against the targets that you want to be able to do damage to, this thing is way too many points to be worrying about those. So this thing is really good against regular Space Marines. Regular Space Marines are cheap. The Hemlock Wraith Fighter is 155 points. Very fragile, and honestly, just not worth it. Needs a complete redesign, in my opinion, and fast. I know the flyers are supposed to suck, but this one is probably one of the worst in the game. All right, next up is Maugan Ra. Maugan Ra is, weirdly enough, I think he's an A-tier model. Call me crazy. Call me crazy. I think after the recent points decreases, you know, the last time I did my tier list, he was more expensive. Now he's only 100 points. Which puts him pretty much on par with the Autarch. The Autarch gets the free stratagem, but Maugan Ra gets just raw damage. He just does so much more damage than the Autarch does. And again, he's going to shoot pretty much every turn. His weapon's not fantastic, but it does have dev wounds. And if you consider that the Dark Reaper squad that he's going to be with is probably a unit of 10, he's going to get 2 aspect tokens, which means he can push through 4 mortal wounds against anything. Also, you could put him in a Falcon for some rerolls to wound every turn, which is also pretty nice. The only thing I don't like about the Falcon is the Falcon doesn't hit that hard itself, and it's pretty expensive. So you're paying 130 points for some rerolls and a Bright Lance and a couple Pulse Laser shots. You know, it doesn't really make much sense to me anymore now that I've played the Falcon multiple times in games, and, well, I've now sold it and shipped it off. So it's, you know, to me, the Falcon's a cool looking model, but it just doesn't have the punch that it did in the index, and I'm just not as big of a fan. I really didn't realize how much that reroll to hit, reroll to wound actually mattered until I didn't have it. Okay, next up is Baharroth. And I think Baharroth is probably also A tier. I think he's probably above. I'm gonna put him above Wind Riders here. Well, I guess here's fine. I'm gonna put him above Maugan Ra. The reason I like him is Cloud Strike is very powerful, especially in Seer Council where you could do that cheese where you could just kind of deep strike within 6, toss that grenade pack, Swooping Hog grenade pack, and then use Unshrouded Truth to bounce your unit back wherever you want it to. That's really powerful. But also just deep striking 6 inches is super good. He also has the ability to Sky Leap, which makes it pretty hard for your opponent to actually respond to Baharroth in any given turn. So if you're able to kill everything within the vicinity that Baharroth and his unit of swoops is in, then your opponent's not going to be able to respond to it when Baharroth Sky Leaps out. So yeah, also he does pretty good damage when he comes in. He does auto crits, so he gets 4 lethal hits against anything he wants to, which is really powerful, especially against high toughness things. So yeah, I really like him. I really like him with Swooping Hawks. He's a good all-purpose damage dealer with his unit. Can deal damage to pretty much any target in the game. And that is one of the reasons why he is so good. So I do think he's absolutely an A-tier unit. All right, let's talk about the Avatar of Khaine, everybody's favorite beat stick. Definitely C tier. I'd actually put him above both Wraith Knights, though. I think, weirdly enough, he's better than the Wraith Knight. He's more durable than the Wraith Knight, and he does more damage in close combat than the Wraith Knight. So, well, that's debatable. The damage in combat's debatable, especially without Fate Dice. But, the Avatar is okay. He's a durable beat stick. He's a lot of stats, but he is expensive at 300 points. I still think you don't take him. He's one of those units that you just take for fun, If you love him, if you have him painted up and stuff, you'll run him in your army. He'll do okay for you. I think better players can get more out of him. I think he's good in Warhost because of the -1 to hit that you can put on him and the extra, aspect token movement that you can give him. Other than that, I don't think even in aspect host he has a place. I think Warhost he's good. Aspect host, having a stratagem that allows him to hit a little bit harder, not great, right? Not that good. Honestly, it's just not. Giving him rerolls of 1s is nice, but it's not needed because he's already hitting on 2s, and typically you don't need more than that. Sometimes, the 1s help, but if you don't have any more mobility, if you don't have any more durability, extra damage isn't going to save you. So yeah, I think he's definitely in need of serious buffs. I think he's honestly, between you and me, guys, I think he's 270. I think the most I'd pay for this guy is 270 points. I think at 270, you still probably wouldn't see him in most competitive lists, but he would be a lot better for the vast majority of Eldar players, right? Who love using him and who love the way he looks. All right, let's talk about, and one more thing. The +1 to advance and charge rolls is really cool, but it's only 6-inch range, so it really doesn't help that much in most cases. Otherwise, I think it's a really good ability with Howling Banshees and stuff, but it's typically not how you want to use Howling Banshees. Yeah, he's just too expensive. All right, let's talk about Rangers. Rangers are A tier. Actually, I'd even go so far as to say S tier. I'm going to put them in S tier. Lower end S tier. Reason why? Because they have the most utility out of any Eldari unit in the book. They have Infiltrate. They have the ability to do a D6 reactive move, which means that you can basically spread these guys out on close to 2 objectives. If your opponent moves towards one of the objectives, you can move towards the other one. If your opponent tries to charge them, you can move D6 back and hopefully get out of charge range. If your opponent tries to, shoot them, then they can reactive move if they survive. And they also have stealth, so they're very hard to hit. So one single unit of something typically isn't enough to kill this unit unless it's a very significant amount of shots. So, yeah, these guys do very well for themselves, and honestly, in my opinion, one of the best units in the game for the cost. Only 55 points. Very good. They also come with 5+ invuls, so it makes it harder for high AP attacks to kill them as well. All right, let's talk about Shroud Runners, the mounted version of the Rangers. The mounted version of the Rangers are A tier. They're strong. I think they're a good unit. I think what kind of unfortunately makes them a little bit less usable than Rangers, obviously, is Rangers have small bases. They're easy to hide. Shroud Runners are harder to hide, but they're also much more durable. -1 to hit, 3 wounds apiece, toughness 4, 5 up invuls makes this unit weirdly durable against a lot of different targets, which is awesome because that means your opponent will overcommit to killing them. I've had several games, like basically almost every one of my games, my opponent overcommits a unit to be able to kill these guys because they do have stealth and they do have 3 wounds apiece. And if your opponent overcommits something, that is a big deal for us Aeldari players because it means we can take advantage of it, right? So if our opponent kills all 3 of these guys with a unit of Hellblasters, for example, and I actually think they would survive against Hellblasters, but let's assume they don't. Hellblasters are much more expensive. Even with their points decreases, they're more expensive than Shroud Runners. So, especially if they took a hazardous roll. So yeah, they have a more expensive unit just hanging out there, out in the open, ready for you to kill. And that's at the very worst, right? At the very best, it's Hellblasters and another unit that has to come in and take them out. Insanely good value. Also, just having Scout 9 is very good for getting up the battlefield. They have big bases, so that Scout 9 is very important for getting them in a position where they can actually score objectives in the middle of the battlefield, somewhere in no man's land, or, of course, provide some move blocking and screening. All right, let's talk about the Yncarne. God, I was kind of dreading talking about this guy, but here we go. I think the Yncarne needs serious buffs. I would put him actually behind the Avatar of Khaine at this point. And the reason being is because now that he can't benefit from lethal intent in his own detachment, he just becomes much less maneuverable, and he's also more expensive. So I just don't think he's all that good anymore. Now, I could be totally wrong, but personally, I just think he's not really worth running. I think a lot of people that are running Ynnari anyway are going to be jumping onto other armies that are more powerful. So, you know, the top-end competitive players are probably not running Ynnari anymore anyway. But I don't think the Yncarne's even competitive then. I don't even think if somebody wanted to stay with Ynnari, they would choose to keep the Yncarne in their army. I think he was pretty borderline before. He didn't do a whole lot of damage. His damage was not that great, despite what GW might have said in a couple of championship games. The Yncarne's damage is subpar at best. And I think really the main power of the Yncarne comes with his battlefield control, being able to replace, essentially, a unit that was just destroyed, either by shooting or in combat, which gives him some utility. And being more expensive, being unable to move via lethal intent anymore, just kind of makes him that much worse. And in my opinion, he was already borderline before. So I think the Yncarne needs buffs. I'm sorry. I think he does. I think they over-nerfed the Ynnari detachment, and I think now he's in need of some buffs. All right, let's talk about the Troop Master. The Troop Master is pretty decent. I think the Troop Master probably belongs in A tier. Now, the reason why I think he belongs in A tier is because he's actually just good in every detachment with a unit of Quins. I think a lot of detachments can get a lot of value out of a unit of Quins with a Troop Master in a Star Weaver because we don't really have easy access to a lot of mortal wound damage. The Troop Master and Quins are one of the best mortal machines in the entire codex, right? Being able to charge into something, deal a bunch of dev wounds, and also throw a grenade is fantastic. And also, if they kill the unit, they're able to get back in their transport. The Troop Master is also able to do a lot of damage himself. He has a damage 2 weapon with high AP, -2 AP. He can change, or excuse me, he can reroll ones to hit, and he gets +1 to wound by himself. He's a little bit expensive at 75, but he's one of those characters that's well worth the cost. Absolutely worth the cost. So, yeah, the Troop Master is really good. I think, obviously, in Harlequins, he's an auto-include. He's an S tier in Harlequins. And I think he's just, in general, an A tier unit if you do end up taking him. Most detachments don't use Harlequin units, but we might see more people using Quins because, again, we're seeing heavy toughness skews. We're seeing heavy armor skews in our opponent's armies. And I think Quins are a good answer to that, despite the fact that they don't have much strat support. All right, let's talk about the Autarch on foot. The Autarch on foot is extremely strong. He's A tier. Excuse me. So the Autarch did get a nerf to 85, and I think that's probably why I didn't put him in S tier. He is a little bit expensive, but he offers a lot for Howling Banshees specifically. So putting him with Howling Banshees gives the unit more damage, gives the unit a good breakpoint to where they can actually kill enemy units of 5, guaranteed. Being able to throw a grenade, overwatch for free, and do all that stuff is really good. But also he allows you to reroll advance rolls and reroll battle focus abilities. So fade back, if you roll that 1, guess what, guys? You get to reroll it. If you roll something like, a 2, you can reroll it, right? So he allows you to do that, which is really cool. Really good guy, honestly. And Banshees, he's one of the best. And I just want to double check something real quick because I'm pretty sure he gets something else as well. Aha, right? He does have the fusion gun. He also has... Oh, yeah, never mind. Okay, so when he's with Banshees, he also gets fights first, right? So he gets fights first with the Banshees. I guess that's assumed. But if he's with Scorpions, he gets Scouts, Infiltrators, and Stealth. So he can also be used with other units. He can actually join quite a few units. Dire Avengers, Fire Dragons, Dark Reapers. He can join a lot of foot units. And what I will say is, and I kind of messed up on this in a recent video I did on the Autarch, but just to correct myself, he does also benefit from the abilities of that specific unit. So Fire Dragons being able to reroll damage rolls against vehicles and monsters and hit rolls and all that, the Autarch benefits from that. So if you want to join him to Fire Dragons, you can. It's not, in my opinion, the play, but you can do it. You can also join him to Dire Avengers and give him sustained hits 1 within half range, which actually can be pretty good because he has a fusion gun, right? So you can actually join him to a unit of 5 Dire Avengers. He can use an aspect token, and he can pop 2 shots at something. Pretty decent. You can also attach him, of course, to Dark Reapers, and he can ignore ballistic skill modifiers, and you can give him a Reaper launcher, right? So there's a lot of things that the Autarch on foot can do. Very strong character. Got a little bit of a points nerf, so he's not as efficient. There's certain times where you're, probably not going to want to spend the extra points just for a free CP a turn, especially if you already have multiple Autarchs in your army. But it is pretty good. He makes your army decently CP efficient. Okay, let's talk about Fuegan. Fuegan is another A tier model. I'd put him just right behind, well, I'm going to put him ahead of Jain Zar. I think he's more important than ever. The reason why, simply, there's a lot of armor and toughness skew out there, and Fuegan slaps. He absolutely slaps. He has a ton of damage with his Fire Pike, his Seer Song. He can also just absolutely wreck Space Marine squads, so he kind of dual purposes into Marines. He has a revive ability, which allows him to get back up after death, which, as we all know, is one of the most broken abilities in the game. Super powerful. And he has good combat potential with his Fire Axe. AP -4 and Strength 5 will take down most Space Marines pretty easily. Outside of that, though, he does have trouble dealing with tougher targets in combat. So don't expect him to deal as much damage to Terminator-type models as Jain Zar would, but at the same time, he can pop a vehicle pretty easily with his Melt to 6. Okay, so that's Fuegan. Awesome model. Let's talk about Swooping Hawks. Swooping Hawks are also A tier. I would actually, I'm going to say they're A tier. I'm going to put them up here. Now, there's something in me keeping them from S tier, and I think it's just because even though they can do damage, they don't do that much damage, right? And just to give you a kind of a quick math rundown, even against tough targets, regular Swooping Hawks without Baharroth are dealing about 4 lethal hits. And they're going to get about 3 more 6s to wound. So you're going to be dealing about 7 wounds to a, target, but they get their armor save, right? So they roll 7 dice, They're probably failing 2 of them on a 3-up. You're only doing 2 damage, and you're going to do 2 more damage with the grenade pack. So in total, you're doing 4 damage. It's not bad. It's a good finishing unit. It can definitely finish a unit off. But I would say they're in the same category in that damage vein as Wind Riders, right? They can finish something off, but they can't necessarily actually kill anything except light infantry. The thing about Wind Riders is that they can actually deal some significant damage against Space Marine targets. So instead of dealing 2 damage to, or getting 2 Space Marine kills, Wind Riders can actually get much more because their base damage is 2. So if your opponent, is failing saves left and right, then you can get quite a few kills with those Wind Riders. Swooping Hawks are a little bit more of a utility unit, though. They're able to screen for you much better than Wind Riders. They're able to move block much better. If you take them in big units, they can deal a lot more mortal wound damage. They're also, faster because they're infantry, so they can move through walls, which also makes them really good. And yeah, I guess the last thing is you have an aspect token in there, and you also have Baharroth himself who can join them, which can make them really good. So I do think, yeah, absolutely an A-tier unit. Are they on the same level of auto-include that Howling Banshees and Dark Reapers are? No, I would say no. I would say that they're a good unit, but they're far from an auto-include in every single list. I don't think they're that strong. But I do think they're pretty good. Okay, let's talk about Asurmen, the old ass man. Unfortunately, Ass Man is taking quite a bit of dickings lately, and I think his ass is a little bit sore. So I'm going to put him in B tier. He's very detachment specific, and even then, I think he's on the lower end of this list. I do actually think he's better than that, though. So I'm going to put him right there in the middle, smack in the middle. Reason why I'm putting him here is just because he is really good in some detachments. Like, he's really good in Warhost. Being able to, get a bunch of sustained hits and then proc his dev wounds on 5+ against infantry with aspect tokens makes him really good at killing 3 wound models. On top of that, he's surprisingly good as an assassin. Being able to push through a bunch of mortal wounds on enemy characters is chef's kiss. It's really good. So let me give you a quick example of something I've done in a few games. On quite a few occasions, Asurmen's unit of Dire Avengers has been charged by an insane unit that's really good in combat, right? Chosen, or Terminators, Chaos Terminators, or sometimes it's Howling Banshees, or it could be something like, Dark Angel, Death Company, whatever it is, right? And they have a Terminator character in that unit. Usually, I would say the Dire Avengers are boned, and so is Asurmen. But if you have your aspect tokens ready, you can actually push through a significant amount of damage with his sword. So on quite a few occasions, I have used the CP to use Epic Challenge, used Precision on an enemy character, rolled my dice to hit. I'm hitting on 2s. I hit almost all of them, probably 5 dice. I usually get about 1 6 to wound, and then I put 2 more 6s with my 2 aspect tokens through to the character, which means the character is taking 9 mortal wounds. So what happens next is rather simple. The character dies. Unless it has a feel no pain against mortals, it's just dead. And even if it does have like a 5+ feel no pain or something like that, it's still pushing through 6 damage, which is pretty good. In addition to the other saves it needs to make, which is probably a couple more saves at AP -3, which means they'll fail probably 1 more, which means they'll probably end up dying anyway. So, yeah, he's a really good character assassin if you run him with a 10-man unit. Surprisingly so. Your opponent will not expect something like that from a shooting unit, and Asurmen can easily wipe out the rest of the unit after that. If they're 3 wound Terminators, it's easy. If they're chosen, it's easy. They'll probably rip through the Dire Avengers like, warm butter, but the rest of the squad is going to be hard-pressed to kill Asurmen. Asurmen is very tough. He's a very good model by himself. Unfortunately, his shooting attacks are kind of crap. Outside of his feat turn, they're strength 5, AP -1, damage 2, which is just awful. But during his feat turn, they're amazing. I still don't think he's worth 135 points. And that's the other thing. If he was cheaper, I think you'd see him more. But he's 135 points, Dire Avengers are also very expensive for what they do, so it's just not a very cost-efficient unit. But I think that if you have fun with Dire Avengers and you love running them, and you love running them with the Asurmen, find a way to make it work. I certainly did. I run him in Seer Council, and he works just fine. He's done great things for me in Seer Council. He's done great things for me in War Host. In Aspect Host, he's also been great. It's just how you use him, right? But he is overcosted. There's no doubt about it. 135 points, way too expensive for this guy. 80 points, way too expensive for Dire Avengers. You really do need to be creative to be successful with these two units. All right, let's move on to Lhykhis. Lhykhis, my baby. Lhykhis is S tier. She's one of the only S tier, in my opinion, Phoenix Lords. Why do I put her in S tier? Because she has such a large threat range that your opponent is going to live in constant fear of her. She is the ex-wife that comes to you for alimony every month. She is hot, she doesn't fuck around, and most of all, she turns warp spiders into a legitimate combat threat. Being able to flicker jump and then charge afterward is some of the most insane combination of rules in the entire game. It's the, by far, bar none, the fastest unit in the game. On top of that, Lhykhis is a really good buff. She actually buffs her own unit if she wants to shoot at what she charges. She gives her unit crits on 5s with all their lethal attacks. By the way, Lhykhis is getting lethal attacks on all of her melee weapons, and the Exarch, if he's taking the Power Blade array, which he should, will be getting lethal attacks on all of his attacks. It's just amazing. Also, things like shuriken cannons, scatter lasers, shots from Dire Avengers, Swooping Hawks, they're all getting bonuses to hit as well. Not just in shooting, but also in melee. It's for the rest of the turn. So, yeah, things can get pretty crazy pretty quickly against the target that Lhykhis shoots at. She also has some decent, she has a decent melee profile, really good, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2 with 5 attacks. And then she gets 5 more attacks that are extra quote-unquote attacks that have damage 1. And they're pretty decent as well. They're not as good as her, basically sword or weave render, but, they're still good, right? They're still good enough to put some wounds on some Space Marines and probably do some lethal hits to a vehicle or two. Yeah, she's awesome. She's one of the best models, in my opinion, in the entire range. And she's definitely S tier. I think the only reason you haven't seen her as much is because Ynnari has been so dominant. But now that Ynnari has kind of cooled a little bit, Ynnari's nerfed to the ground, I think you'll see more people bringing Lhykhis. Okay, let's talk about warp spiders. So, just like Lhykhis, they are one of the best units in the book. But I actually think they're higher up on the list just because you basically see 3 units or 2 or 3 units of these in almost every list. And they just do so much for you. Just like I talked about before when I was comparing, Dire Avengers to, other units. Warp Spiders can flicker jump, they can screen, they can move block, they can score objectives, they can deal damage, they can provide an overwatch threat. They're just very powerful. The flicker jump is a huge risk, and it's probably one of the reasons why I don't put them ahead of things. Well, I'm actually going to put them ahead of Dark Reapers, but I don't think they're much ahead of Dark Reapers. I think they're kind of equal in the roles that they play, but they are very strong. Obviously, their shooting attacks are good, and they're just a really good control unit that can lock down huge areas of the board. Really love Warp Spiders, and just having at least a couple units in your army will put your opponent in a constant state of panic. Okay, let's talk about the Voidweaver. So the Voidweaver sucks. The Voidweaver is D. Now, the reason why it's D is because its ability just doesn't make sense. Lone Op 18 is one of the worst abilities on this thing because it only has a 24-inch range, which means, again, it just suffers the same issues over and over again, right? It just often doesn't actually kill anything. And then because it doesn't kill anything, it's always going to be under threat. And it's really expensive. If this thing was cheaper, I would say it's much better, but it's 125 points. pretty expensive for something very fragile. It only has 6 wounds, and its weapons aren't that good, right? The prismatic cannon is just a very weak Brightlands platform. So essentially, imagine a Warwalker, but worse. It is a worse Warwalker. It does have 2 shuriken cannons, but again, shuriken cannons aren't that big of a deal. They're really not. I mean, you know, they do some damage. You'll probably get 1 lethal hit, maybe a couple wounds on something, but that's about it. If it's in cover, it's just going to be its base armor save. And it's just not that good. I think it's way too expensive for what it is. It doesn't do enough damage. It's not a transport. It doesn't double as a transport. Hey, if it doubled as a transport, guys, I would be taking them, but it just doesn't. So yeah, just way too expensive and doesn't do enough damage for the cost. And the 18-inch loan-up ability doesn't help it. All right, let's talk about Skyweavers. Skyweavers are actually pretty good in the Harlequin detachment, but I would say they're kind of in this category right here. They're kind of just in B tier, right? They're only good in the Harlequin detachment, and even then, their damage is very swingy. They could do a lot of damage against a vehicle if you roll well, or they could do nothing. The reason why I put them in B tier and not lower, though, is because they have some good combat ability, and they're -1 to hit natively. On top of having a 4+ invulnerable save and 3 wounds apiece, this makes the unit very powerful into multiple different types of targets. It can multi-class into different things, which is why I like it. You will see a lot of Harlequin players running these in their lists because, yeah, dev wounds are very powerful. A unit of 4 of these guys, realistically, could kill a fetid bloat drone every single turn, no problem. Which, obviously, they cost a lot more points than the fetid bloat drone. We all know Death Guard need a lot of nerfs, guys. But, you know, I mean, being able to just kill something outright like that without having to worry about invuls or armor saves or any of that crap is pretty awesome. So, yeah, these guys are good in Harlequins, but outside of that, I just don't see much of their value. They're really bad against monsters, too, so their matchup potential is potentially horrendous. Okay, let's look at Fire Dragons. Fire Dragons are an auto-include. We know we're going to put these up here anyway, so let's just put them in. They're a lot more expensive than they were when the Codex came out, so unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that they're a little lower on the totem pole nowadays, but I still think they're one of the most effective units in the Codex. They're the only unit we have that can effectively wipe out vehicles, right? And I'm talking about substantial vehicles and monsters. I'm not talking about a Rhino here, guys. I'm not talking about a land speeder. Oh, Proxy Hammer, but you know, my Wave Serpent's Bright Lance can kill a, you know, no. I'm talking about serious vehicles, right? So Fire Dragons are going to be able to deal good damage consistently every single time you shoot them if you don't split fire like an idiot, like I have done a few times. So by the way, guys, it might seem, you know, it might seem worth it to split fire, but just make sure you look at your opponent's CP, because if your opponent has some sort of defensive stratagem, they can easily just use the defensive stratagem on whatever you shoot least, and then they can save that target completely, and then maybe you don't kill the intended target, right? So don't split fire with them unless you have a full unit of 10 with Fuegan. That's my advice. Yeah, having said that, though, the unit of 10 did not get a points increase in the last balanced data slate in June, so you can easily take unit of 10 for the same cost as before, which might actually be worth it. If you're hopping them in and out of a Wave Serpent in Warhost, I think that could be a decent way to use them, especially with the bonus range that Fuegan gets. Okay, let's talk about the Starweaver here. So the Starweaver is the quintessential transport of the Harlequins. It's 80 points, it's very cheap. Has 2 shuriken cannons, has a 4-up invul save, so it's weirdly durable. Also allows the Harlequins to jump back into it after the fight phase is over. However, it's kind of only good and only super good in Harlequins, so I'm just going to put it in B tier. I'm going to put it kind of at the same level, a little bit above Skyweavers, right there. It's kind of one of those things that it's auto-include for Harlequin detachments, but outside of that, I don't think it's like super strong. It's kind of like, you know, Quins I think are good. I think they're on the lower end of A tier probably as a unit, but they're not A tier because of the Starweaver. They're A tier because they have grenades, they have dev wounds, they have, all these tricks and things they can do. Starweavers are kind of just their support. So I kind of think of them as like one giant package, but you can take Quins without a Starweaver, and you can take them in a Falcon, which is also a really good way to use them. So I kind of think that the, Starweaver is more of a B tier unit. Okay, moving on to Striking Scorpions. Striking Scorpions are A tier. I'm going to put them in high A tier, and I have a reason why they're not in S tier. So, with the increase in points that all of us saw in all of our lists, the first thing that we're all going to do, let's be real, we're going to drop Scorpions down to Rangers. That's just what's going to happen. Scorpions are good, guys, but they're 85 points a unit. And they're a little bit of a luxury. They're awesome. I'm still going to use Scorpions in my lists because I love them. Scout combined with the ability to, infiltrate is a very powerful combo. They're weirdly durable because they have that 3-up. They're usually always in cover. They have stealth. And, again, having Scout makes them able to move behind obscuring terrain and stuff. So they're weirdly durable. The problem with Striking Scorpions is that they're 85 points a unit. And that's kind of expensive. They're more expensive than Scouts. They're more expensive than Intercessors. They're more expensive than Assault Intercessors. And they will lose if they get charged by any of those things. Now, of course, if they charge something else, they will handily win. They will handily beat Assault Intercessors. They will handily beat Scouts, like almost, wow. Against Scouts, it's just such a slaughter, it's not even funny. But again, Scouts are cheaper, right? And they can deal with a lot of chaff units that are going to be fighting over objectives on the first couple turns. The problem is we already have so much stuff that deals with that anyway. The real value of Striking Scorpions comes in move blocking, screening, and scoring objectives. It doesn't come in their combat ability. There are times when I will simply not even charge them. I will just move them in front of my opponent's units so that they can't move. That's the best way to use them. And I can kind of do the same thing with Rangers. If I get first turn. If I go second, I can't really do any of that anyway. So there's no point. So a lot of times it's just better to have the cheaper unit out there, even though Scorpions do more damage and have more utility and are more durable, right? So Scorpions are good, but I kind of give the edge to Rangers as far as that, infiltrating unit. I know some of you will disagree with that, and that's fine. But I think because of the point decreases, we're going to see Scorpions kind of less and less. I think people are going to have to make some hard choices. Maybe people were running 2 Scorps. Now maybe we see them run 1 Scorp and 1 Ranger. I think that's going to be common. Okay, let's talk about the Falcon. The Falcon is pretty good, but it's a little too expensive, guys. I'm going to put it in the same category as the Wave Serpent. I'm put a little bit behind the Wave Serpent here. I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it has some interesting synergies which keep it afloat in B tier. I think Harlequins, running Harlequins out of it is very good with dev wounds. I think running a 5-man squad of something that you can just cycle in and out, like Howling Banshees coming out of it, is pretty good, although I think Howling Banshees just on the board is better because of the ability to heroically intervene. What's also good in the Falcon is, weirdly enough, Dark Reapers with Maugan Ra. I talked about that earlier. That's pretty good. Dire Avengers, not so great, but if you put Dire Avengers with Asurmen, that could be potentially good on the feet turn. It's just things, there's a lot of things that are potentially good, but I'm not really too happy about the Falcon, just because it is 130 points, it's expensive, and it doesn't have those rerolls anymore. It doesn't have that reroll to hit, it doesn't have that reroll to wound that the Index had, it doesn't have Fire and Fade anymore, right? So it's much less mobile, and it just doesn't feel as strong as it did in the Index. But I still think it's a good model. It's usable, it definitely has a lot of cool synergies and combos that you can use in your games. I just don't think it's going to be a staple for every single list out there, and yeah, that's basically where I sit with it. It's good, but it's not that good, right? Okay, let's move on to the Quinn unit. The Quins, the troop. Low A tier. Low A tier because even though it's mostly just useful in the Quins detachment, it should belong in B tier, but actually because it has a lot of cool abilities that can work outside of the Quins detachment, I think it becomes low A tier. It is one of the only units that consistently deals mortal wounds, right? So being able to throw a grenade, shoot some fusion pistols, which are very powerful, by the way, and then charge into something and do a bunch of mortals is really good. You combine that with the Starweaver and the Troop Master, and you're looking at about a 200 point investment, but for that 200 points, you're getting a lot of punch, right? A lot of utility, a lot of punch, and, you know, potentially a unit that your opponent can't really deal with in combination with a lot of the other stuff in your list. So I actually think this unit's really good. I think it's, you know, a contender for some lists. I think that more people should try running a single unit of Harlequins in their list and see how it does against certain enemy units, certain armor and toughness skew units, because of the insane amount of mortal wounds that it can deal, especially with the Troop Master. Alrighty, let's talk about the Ynnari stuff. So, Kabbalite Warriors. I think they're strong. I mean, obviously they're not super strong, but I think they're a strong unit in Ynnari. I think they're one of the best units right now in the Ynnari, because Ynnari is now more of a shooting army. Because they have all the stratagems, it really just benefits shooting stuff, right? It benefits being killed and shooting, right? Because a lot of the melee stuff got nerfed to hell. So Kabbalites are actually in this kind of unique position of being really good at shooting and also having a little bit of combat, right? I mean, they have the Sabarite, which has a little bit of combat ability. It's not bad, right? It's not good either, don't get me wrong, but it's a decent melee weapon. And the unit also gets grenades, so it can throw a grenade. And you can split it up with venoms and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, I think it's a strong unit, definitely strong in Ynnari. And being able to, you know, provide sticky objectives for a primarily, you know, primary objective control army is good as well. So, A tier. Ynnari Reavers. Honestly, I think they need some buffs. And the reason why I think they need some buffs is they're too expensive. I think they really don't do any damage. They're very low damage. They have utility, but we already have cheap units in our army that do the same thing for 65, or I think they're actually 70 points. So for 70 points, I could have a unit of Rangers. Actually, for 55 points, I can have a unit of Rangers, right? And the Rangers are going to kind of do the same thing. For 10 more points, I can have a unit of Wind Riders. And Wind Riders do much more damage and also pretty much do the same thing with utility, right? So there are a couple advantages to the Reavers, but mostly the advantage lies in their speed, and their speed is just not that good. I think you're better off going with Wind Riders if you want some more damage, or if you just want the utility in a scoring unit, Rangers are fine. All right, let's talk about Witches. Witches are also in need of serious buffs, and they're actually, in my opinion, worse than Reavers. They're 90 points for a unit that will never do any damage. They only do damage to Imperial Guard and other Eldar. Anything that is toughness 4, they will bounce off of like a knife against a kitchen sink. Seriously, they're not going to do well. And I say this in all, like, I've played Dark Eldar quite a few times. I've played Witches quite a few times. Even in Dark Eldar, where they have Lance, where they have bonus AP, where they have reroll hits, where they have all these different stratagems that they can benefit from, they still don't do that much damage. Like, I've charged a squad of 5 with a Succubus into a simple unit of 5 Intercessors, and I failed to kill all of them. Right? I mean, it's not likely. You probably will kill about 5 Marines with that combo, but if you roll kind of bad, you're not going to kill them. And that's with all the buffs. That's with +1 to wound, +1 AP, sustained hits, you know, re-rolling for hits, you know, all this stuff, right? They didn't kill them. So on a below average roll. So, yeah, they just don't do any damage. Their OC's fine, but they're not cheap enough to the point where, I mean, for 10 more points, I can get Storm Guardians, right? For 10 more points, I can get a much better unit in Storm Guardians. Storm Guardians are honestly better in almost every way. They're more durable. They're not as fast, but they have better ranged weapons for sure. And they're sticky. They have sticky objectives, right? Which is a great utility ability. And the Witch ability is just desperate escape tests. But let me tell you, they're never going to get the chance to use it. Because if they charge into a unit, even just a regular unit of Space Marines, they're just not killing it. Let me do some quick math for you. 5 Witches has 15 attacks. They hit on 3+. 10 are going to hit. They wound Marines on 5s up. 3 are going to wound. They're AP -1. Your Marine friend is going to get 4 up saves. Maybe 1 Marine dies. Let's say you get lucky and 1 Space Marine bites the dust. They're going to attack you back with 12 attacks. 8 are going to hit. 5 are going to wound. You're going to lose 3 Witches. Do you really think they're going to fall back from that combat? I doubt it. I doubt it. So yeah, Witches are just not that good. Not a good unit. All right. I mean, maybe for like using them as a trash unit, but even then, I think they're too expensive. The reason why I think they need buffs is I think they need to go down to like 70 points. I think they're a 70-point unit, honestly, because they just have no benefit from Ynnari. All of their strengths lie in the Drukhari detachments. Okay, now we have the Raider. The Raider is, honestly, I'm going to put it in C tier as well. I think it's higher up, though. I would put it like, let's put it right here above the, no, I think it's better than these ones. I'm going to put it right here in the middle of the pack. Reason why is because, yes, you can put Cobblite Warriors in it, and with Soulsight, they can do quite well. They can hit for quite hard. The Raider itself, though, isn't that good. It really needs all the synergies to work. So if you put a squad of 5 Cobblites in it, maybe you use a Venom to split 2 squads up, and you put the 2, Darklance Cobblites, so you put all the special weapons in the Raider, and you have like this like huge gunboat with all these guns sticking out of it. Even then, it's a little too expensive. It's 80 points for this thing. It costs 70 points in Dark Eldar. Tell me why it costs 80 points in Ynnari, but 70 points in Dark Eldar. I'll tell you why. Because of Lethal Intent, which it doesn't benefit from it anymore. So it should be, honestly, in my opinion, cheaper. I just think it should be cheaper. It's also really hard to move around. It's not as easy to hide as a Venom. It's extremely awkward, right? So that's another thing that's kind of going against it. But it can offer a lot of firepower if you build it correctly with Cobblites and all that sort of stuff. All right, let's talk about the Venom. The Venom is really good. I think the Venom's an A-tier unit along with Cobblite Warriors. It allows things to get back into it, which is really good. It also splits units up to make them more effective. So, a huge unit of Cobblites is 110 points. It's not very points efficient, but if you split the unit up, you put half the squad in the Venom and then half the squad doing actions or something else, all of a sudden, you have 2 highly efficient damage dealing and scoring units respectively. So I think the Venom at 70 points is actually really worth it to be able to split units like Cobblite Warriors up and to put some really good damage into infantry units. And also, again, like I said, we're facing a toughness and armor skew, and at least as far as the toughness goes, Cobblite Warriors and Venoms have poison weapons, which are anti-infantry 3+. So that does really help thin the ranks of those Plague Marines and stuff like that, especially if you have several of these shooting at the enemy. All right, lastly, we have Incubi. Incubi took a pretty big hit, and I would say that at this point, they're probably just, I'm actually going to put them just ahead of Yvrain in B tier. They're just okay, right? Banshees are clearly the better choice in most situations. These guys don't have fights first base. They're not that durable. They, especially now, because they've lost they've decreased or they've increased in points, right? They used to be 75, now they're 85. Yvrain doesn't allow them to reroll wounds anymore, only reroll wounds of 1, so they're much less hard-hitting, which, by the way, was the reason why they were taken, is because they were super hard-hitting. They were a great Death Star. But now it's just, they just don't really do much damage. So, yeah, just subpar damage, subpar rules, high points cost, not a very good unit. I will say their only saving grace is the fact that their base stats are good enough to kill Space Marines, and that makes them at least useful. But other than that, I just don't think they're that good. Okay. So, that is it, guys. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the tier list. Again, I don't think I'm forgetting any units. Let me know if I am, and I will, make an abbreviation in the comment section below. But this is where I think we sit. Most of our units are pretty strong still, but we have a lot of units that kind of slipped down a little bit over the course of the nerfs. Yes, we still have S tier units, guys. Howling Banshees are one of the best melee units in the game for their points. And we have a lot of other good units as well, right? It's not just like all doom and gloom. We do have some really excellent stuff. However, like I said, I do think we have some stuff that slipped down. But good thing is we have some stuff that also came up as well, like the Warwalker, which I think is really cool. Personally, because I was one of the probably only people who bought one of those dual Warwalker sets when they came out for the Codex. And I think they're cute, guys. I know a lot of people don't like the way they look, but I think they look adorable. So I like them. I put them in my army, little chickens. And, they do well for me. They do well for me. Honestly, I'm happy with them. I've never been disappointed in them. I've always at least gotten something out of them over the course of the game. So, even in the worst case scenarios where I'm like missing like turn after turn, they usually live to fire another turn because your opponent's like, oh, these things are trash. Why even bother with them? And then they end up punching you for like, 10 damage or something like that. And the opponent's like, oh, I got it. Right? Like you were just rolling bad, right? So yeah, Warwalker's pretty good. I'm glad they're kind of up there, with the greats now in a lot of situations. But you know what, though? I am going to switch a few things around here. I do think Shroudrunners I have kind of misplaced here. I think Shroudrunners are a little bit ahead of this. I'll put them like right here. Flip it through. I think Baharroth's better than a Wraithlord. Yeah, I'll put Maugan Ra just right there. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's pretty solid for our tier list. Again, some things may be out of place here and there, but I think for the most part that's where they stand. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Where would you put units? I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on things and stuff like that. Also, thank you to all my channel supporters and people who've supported the channel over the last 2.5 years. Your help has really been appreciated and helped the channel grow significantly. I am going to be making a video later today talking about a small little Kickstarter thing that I'm doing because of the release of the Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights Codex. I want to do something along those lines. I want to do an Eldar Knights. We did this a couple years ago, but it just never gained any traction, and I ended up actually finishing the index. So that index is available on the, and by the way, it's a fan dex. It's not official or anything like that, but it's on the channel Discord for free, and we're going to see if people want to support an actual codex with, 4 detachments, new units, hopefully some, 3D printed STL files that you can use for your own games at home, stuff like that. Once again, I want to reiterate, it's not official, it's a fan dex, but, Eldar Knights were a thing, and hopefully, maybe we can generate enough interest from the community to maybe in the future push GW to make Eldar Knights. How cool would that be? I would love that. That would be awesome. So anyway, I'm going to have a video on that later on. If you want to join the channel Discord, I'll leave the link in the description. If you want to support the channel via Patreon, that would be awesome as well. The link will be in the description for that. You don't have to support. You could just join the Patreon for free, which will give you access to our Discord. And if you want to support the channel through the channel store page to grab some Eldar inspired apparel, you're welcome to. There's a lot of cool designs on there, Eldar inspired designs. And lastly, We do also have an Amazon affiliate link for some discounted Eldar minis. One last thing I'd like to say before I go, if you guys are interested in improving as Eldari players or need some advice on anything like that, I do offer pretty much free advice if you join the Discord. Again, it's free. If you want a little bit more of an extended kind of session, if you become a, council member, basically, the top tier of my Patreon, I think it's the Phoenix Court, then I will give you every month sessions where we can talk about improving your list, building up your army, improving your strategies, and also I'll play a game against you on Tabletop Simulator if you're part of that group. Or if you just want to just pay the Patreon, price, you can of course ask for me and I'll be able to help you guys out. So very cheap coaching sessions, by the way. A lot of people on YouTube charge upwards to, $50 an hour. Sometimes some channels charge up to $100 an hour for advice. And, I'm basically giving a lot of my time for free, and I'm just asking you to become a Patreon member. So, that's a pretty good deal if you want to, kind of talk to me and maybe improve your ability to play the faction a little bit. Alrighty, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.